I wouldn't say that my story is a haunting, just a presence that I feel every day. My grandmother died in January 2003. At that time, my daughter was only 14 months old. My grandma just lived and breathed her grandchildren. We always used to say that the love was so strong that she would probably come back and see them. Well, I think that is exactly what is happening in my house. I've never seen her, but I feel her presence. My daughter, I would think, would not remember my grandma because she was so young. It's been over a year now since her death, and my daughter is now 2.5 years old. She constantly talks about Gigi visiting her in her room. Gigi meant great-grandma, and that's what all the kids called her. She tells me things that she wouldn't know. She sees pictures and knows exactly who she is. She tells us that Gigi visits her in her room at night with a flashlight, or she will say, "Tell Gigi to stop waving at me." Last night, as I was tucking her in bed, she looked at me and said, "Shh." I said, "Why?" She responded that Gigi was standing right there. I casually just said, "Oh yeah?" And she again responded, "Yes, she is right there and she is waving at me with a ladybug in her hand." And she proceeds to tell me that Gigi plays with her and her toys all the time. After she said that, she looked over to the area where she said Gigi was and smiled and laughed. I said to her, "What are you laughing at?" Her response was, "Gigi. She told me that I have to start using the potty." Jamie is still potty training. Another time, we were driving in our car on our way home from shopping. It just so happened to be my grandmother's birthday that day, but it was not mentioned at all. It was just in our minds that today was her birthday. My daughter said to me, "You know what today is, Mommy?" I said, "No." "What?" She said, "Today's Gigi's birthday." I was shocked. I asked her how she knew about that, and her response was, "Gigi told me herself. She's sitting right next to me, almost as a matter of fact sort of way." Different things like this happened since she died. I don't feel that she is haunting us. I just feel that she loved my daughter so much that she likes to see her. Do you think that is the case, or am I going crazy? When I was 10, both my grandparents died. Before them, my aunt and uncle died also. They lived with us. Both nights after we found out, my sister and I both woke up in the middle of the night to feel our bed shaking violently while everything else in the house was still. Then, after coming home from each funeral, the door to the bedroom was seen opening and shutting. About 7 weeks after the door, lights went on and off in our basement when no one had been down there. When walking into our rooms, one of my sisters, brothers, or my belongings would fall off of a shelf. My cat was seen chasing a string, hanging in midair, as if my aunt was playing with her. Creepy feelings of being watched while watching TV in my living room were also felt. When outside, you could hear your name being called softly in a little girl's voice, then childish laughing. Random cold spots can be felt around my house, even near heating vents while the heat is on. Computers randomly turning on, and so do faucets, lights, TVs, and radios. Sometimes footsteps can be heard in my house, hurrying up and down the halls. Once I even heard childish crying, like the little girl ghost who calls your name and laughs. I know this story is a little shorter than most, but I appreciate you listening. Does anybody know what's going on exactly? I'm pretty sure it's my grandparents, but who knows? This is something that happened in an old farmhouse my mother lived in quite a few years ago, in a little farm town in Ohio. When she and my younger siblings moved in, they would call and tell us things that were happening around the house. The first thing was the lights either coming on or going off. I told her to tell her landlord because it was faulty wiring. However, when my daughter went to spend a week with them. They were sitting watching TV, and the light was turned off. My sister had to actually get up and turn it back on. So, we knew things were really going on. My mother told me about hearing cars pull up the lane, but when she would get up to look, nothing would be there. This went on for a while, and then she called and told me that one night, when she heard the car, she thought it was my brother coming home, and she just rolled over and went back to sleep. Later, she heard water running in the tub, but it didn't go off. She got up and went to check, thinking my brother turned it on, and went to sleep. When she went in, the tub was almost running over, and my brother had not come home yet. This happened quite often after the first time, so they made sure to check the tub whenever they heard water running. So, we went to pick our daughter up one summer, and I was lying in bed by the window, and everyone else was asleep. I heard a car pull up into the driveway and saw the lights flicker on the window and go off. I raised up to look, but nothing was there, so I had proof of that part of their story. However, after lying back down and trying to go to sleep, all of a sudden, I felt someone or something lay their arm across my waist, just like if it was a spouse, laying there in spoon fashion. I screamed so loud, I woke the whole house. We figured whoever this was, my husband and I were in their bedroom. It scared me really bad at first, knowing no one else was in there. But after the initial shock, I was not afraid because I did not feel threatened by their presence. These things went on until my family moved out. And that's the end of the story. Hope you enjoyed. As a teenager, I lived in Emory, Texas, in Rains County, and had a very strange experience when we first moved there. Our first residence was in an apartment building that had at one time been the Rains Cole School. When the new school was built, the old one was abandoned until someone bought it and decided to turn it into apartments. During the renovations, a group of local children were in the old school gymnasium, playing in what used to be a storage building to hold the chemicals and supplies being used in the work and repairs. Apparently, there was a large drum of flammable liquid in storage there, reportedly paint there, that was ignited by the children playing with a lighter or matches. In the ensuing explosion and fire, one of the boys was killed and the others injured to varying degrees. The gymnasium was destroyed, but this building was connected to the part of the school that was being turned into apartments. The renovations were completed and the apartments were ready to be occupied, hence my family enters the picture. We were the first occupants of apartment 12. The first night we were in the apartment, we heard a lot of movement in the attic area, which my mother put off as some type of animal being up there, even though it sounded awfully loud to be a small animal to me. The next day, I was talking to my next door neighbor's son and asked him if they heard anything in the attic the night before. He said he had heard something every night since they had moved in, and said his parents too had tried to explain it away in something simple. We talked to some of the other people in the building and found out that a lot of them had heard the same thing. We also found out that the ceiling directly over the apartments were a drop ceiling, so that it would be easier to keep the apartments cooler in the summertime and warmer in the winter. This was very distressing to me, because that would make it impossible for someone to be walking on this, but to us, it sounded like heavy footprints directly overhead, but that is in the end. After about a week, we kept noticing little things, like objects apparently being moved forward from the places they were being left. The strangest occurrence to me was a music box belonging to my mother that had a baseball on it and played Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Somehow kept moving off the shelf it sat on and onto the living room table, sides being moved around. We would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of it playing in the living room. My mother kept blaming my little brother and me for this until she was home one night alone and woke up to the sound of the music box playing by itself and sitting on the coffee table, even though she knew that it was on its shelf when she went to bed that night. We finally got used to this happening on a regular basis and even started joking around with each other when we couldn't find something by saying the ghost must have moved it, even though to my brother and me it was still a little creepy. Finally, Christmas time rolled around, and the fun really began. We put up our Christmas tree on Thanksgiving Day, right after dinner, as is our family custom, and took great care in placing the ornaments, as many of them were handmade ornaments from our mother, dating back to the time we were born. The next day, we were up bright and early to head out for our other family tradition, the day after Thanksgiving shopping spree, which was always an all-day affair for us. When we returned that evening, we unloaded the car and were dividing up tape, wrapping papers and bows to go into our rooms and start wrapping gifts, when we noticed that all of the ornaments on the tree were completely rearranged for how they had been when we left that morning. We then moved them back to where we wanted them and went on our way, wrapping presents, and didn't give it a whole lot of thought. After we finished this, we placed our gifts under the tree, made hot chocolate, and listened to Christmas music. The next morning we woke up, only to discover that the ornaments had once again been rearranged, and not only that, but the gifts under the tree had also been moved around by someone during the night, and the music box was once again sitting on the table in front of the couch. We were all pretty well freaked out, but resigned to the fact that no matter what, our guests had a definite opinion on how things should be, and we were fighting a losing battle. During this time, I somehow began to develop an attachment to our guest and started thinking of them as a member of the family. This was the young boy who had been killed during the fire when the renovations were being done, and he was lonely and looking for a friend. I even started asking our friend where things were when I couldn't find them, and it was almost like something would tell me where to find them. I even began telling our guests goodnight when I would get ready for bed at night. This continued throughout the Christmas season, even though I had learned to accept things. My brother and mother couldn't, and she decided it was time to look for someplace else to live. Shortly before the end of January, my mother announced she had found a house for us, and we would be moving the 1st of February. While we were packing for the move, we kept noticing that the things we were boxing up kept appearing back where they had been, like someone didn't want us to leave, which was very disturbing to me because by now, I felt a real attachment to our guests. One of the saddest moments of my life was when I closed that apartment door for the last time because I felt like I was leaving something or someone very important behind. The strangest part was, I could have sworn that I heard a young boy's voice telling me goodbye. I've been a fan of your website for a couple of months, and I connected with some of the stories that have been listed, although I felt some of them were far-fetched. I've always been drawn to ghost stories and understanding the paranormal, even considering taking college courses in paranormal studies. I never really thought about why I was so drawn to it, till my older brother and I were talking about all the different houses we lived in. Throughout my life, half of the houses, maybe more, that I've lived in have been haunted. Ever since I can remember, there was always something going on in my house, whatever house we were in at the time. One of the first houses I lived in, the first I can remember, the previous owner's grandmother passed away in the house and decided to stay. Most of the haunting, from what I remember, I was maybe 3 or 4 years old at the time, was centered in my older sister's bedroom, but the grandmotherly ghost liked my closet too. I figure she liked it because my sister's closet and mine shared the same wall. I was often tucked in by her too. My memories are hazy, but I don't ever remember any harm or maliciousness coming from her. 9 years later, the worst haunted house we lived in, well, that one had a reputation of being spooky. It sat on a double lot, full of plants and grass, overgrown and neglected. Many of the neighbors' reactions to us moving in were, "Oh my god, you're moving in there?" No one ever wanted to tell us why they reacted that way, or why they would come up with some lame excuse for the reaction such as, "We're just surprised, it's been empty for a while." We soon found out why, with good cause. It wasn't a gradual haunting, starting off small. It was as if we were disrupting someone's routine, and we were unwelcome. I still get shivers when I think of that house and living there. The atmosphere was stifling and oppressive. I was so frightened, I couldn't get a handle if the spirit was male or female, but looking back, I think it was male. He liked playing with electricity, flickering the lights, and sometimes turning them off completely, leaving us in the dark until he found it to his benefit to turn them back on. My brother and I were usually the only ones to experience these things, while our parents continued to be skeptical. They preferred to ignore the unexplainable and hired an electrician to check out the breaker panel. Nothing was found, no surprise to my brother and me. I was stressed, trying to stay out of the house as much as possible, getting by however I could. Then I had the nightmare. To give you a little background on this, at the time, I had a Winnie the Pooh giant stuffed bear that I had since I was 3. In my dream, he grew claws and teeth and flew through the air, chasing us from the house. We needed to get away from that place. That was the message in the dream, loud and clear. Waking up from the dream, I looked across my bedroom to see my Pooh Bear looking at me. I could have sworn I had put him in the back of my closet. That was enough for me. I ran to my brother's room and dived in his bed. I sobbed and begged him to let me sleep with him, and he held me and calmed me down. Soon after that, my father lost his job and we lost the house. Thank God for miracles in disguise. A few years after that, we lived in a house where the owner died in my bedroom. The haunting was slow and gradual, and it was my first experience with night terrors. I wrote it off as being stress, and at this time, I was a little more well-read on the subject. I knew that being a teenager, I was more susceptible to poltergeists and high-anxiety paranormal activity. But then, my brother experienced the presence too. We were laying in my bed, talking, and this thing came through my window, traveled between us, and circled the room, exiting where it came. I say thing because it was invisible, but we felt it, heard the energy in the form of a high-pitched ringing. I felt more relieved I wasn't alone, or crazy. Since then, I've experienced many more spirits, night terrors, and deja vu experiences. I seem to be sensitive to these things. I would appreciate any and all feedback. You know, every ship in the Navy has a ghost, or at least that's what they say. I've been in the Navy for 11 years now, and I'm on my 4th ship. I haven't noticed a ghost on all of them, but that doesn't mean they weren't there. I did notice one though, a few times. The ship was the USS Frederick, LST 1184. It's decommissioned now, but when I was there, I met the ship's ghost before anyone even told me there was one. But for the sake of the reader, I'm going to tell you the story about how the ghost came to be first, and then I'll tell you how I met him. All Navy ships have a compartment called a sea chest. This is a void on the bottom deck of the ship that is used for quick ballast. It can suck in water, but force water out by creating either a positive or a negative vacuum in the space. Needless to say, you don't want to be in one when it's operating. Well, this poor soul on the ship went down into one of the sea chests one day during his watch. He didn't have to be in there, but he wanted to take a nap and not get caught. Nobody knew he was in there, and nobody bothered to check, and they engineered lid off the sea chest pumps by creating the vacuum in the space. Within seconds, the poor kid's head imploded as the air got sucked out of his body. Now his ghost haunts the ship. It travels from space to space, mainly in engineering, looking for people that are sleeping on watch. If he finds you sleeping and you're on watch, he'll violently wake you up. This could be anything from making a loud noise to what he did to me. I was sitting in my shop. It was around 2300. That's 11 p.m. for those that don't know 24-hour time. I was technically on watch, but my watch was an on-call watch where they just needed to know where I was in case I was needed. I didn't have to stay up or even stay in my shop, but I was up and in my shop, and I got tired, so I leaned back in my chair, facing the door, and closed my eyes for a quick power nap. Now, my desk was against the bulkhead wall to the left and was facing the door. The only way into and out of my shop was through a large metal gated door that squeaked and rattled when it moved. Along with that, the only way to get to me was to walk around the right-hand side of the desk, which was at the time a maze of broken equipment that I was working on. I was sleeping for maybe 5 minutes, and I was by no means sound asleep. Out of nowhere, I felt someone punch me on the left-hand side of my chest, really hard. I had a bruise there the next day. No, I didn't see him, but I know it was a ghost for a few reasons. 1, there was no way for anyone to get in my shop without me knowing it. 2, no one could have hit me as hard or where I was hit without first coming around my desk, and second, breaking my pen, which I kept in my left chest pocket. The final reason I know it was the ghost, it was because I immediately opened my eyes and saw no one there. The next night was the kicker about that ghost. He never went into the berthings. That's where everyone sleeps. Some say it was because not enough people on the ship believed in him, but I think it was simply because people are allowed to sleep in there. But that night, he went into my berthing. I went in my rack, bed, and I had that feeling that I was being watched. So I woke up, opened the curtain on my rack, and looked out to see who was there and what they wanted. There stood the ghost. I knew it was the ghost because he had no head. He was standing there, facing my rack. When he noticed me looking at him, he gave me a small bow, which I took as he was sorry about the night before. He hadn't known that I wasn't sleeping on watch. The incident that I'm about to relay occurred many years ago, around 1969 or so, in the presence of myself, a friend, and several other people who were on the street at the time. It was a hot summer night in New York City, at about 9 p.m. or so. It was hot enough out that even the elderly Ukrainian women who live on East 10th Street were still outside by their stoops on their lawn chairs, as it was still too hot to go indoors. My friend and I were passing by the old Russian-Turkish bathhouse on our way to my apartment after having had dinner in the village. Communal steam baths were a tradition back in turn of the century Russia. Some of the old white Russians who fled Russia after the 1917 revolution settled in the north end of the Lower East Side and brought the tradition of the steam baths with them. Suddenly, as we were walking by the long, high stoop of the bathhouse, we almost ran into a screaming black man at the foot of the stairs. He looked real in every detail, except for 2 things. He glowed purple and seemed to be composed of pixels, as a television image would be. He was screaming and cursing at someone at the top of the bathhouse stoop and kept looking back while screaming as he ran across the street towards the little group of elderly Ukrainian women who also let out a scream themselves. He ran about 15 yards east down the block, and just as suddenly as he appeared, disappeared into thin air. My friend and I looked at each other and exclaimed in unison, "That guy was purple." The Ukrainian women were laughing and chatting nervously at this point, and nobody could figure out where this guy could have gone. About a year later, I was in an old Bertino's bookstore when a small volume of prose and photographs caught my eye. The title of the book was 10th Street by Bill Benson, published in 1968 by Grossman Publishers. On one of its pages, the book describes 3 old women sitting in their chairs one summer evening on 10th Street between First Avenue and Avenue A. It goes on to say, one summer evening, there was a loud altercation directly across the street in the doorway of the Russian-Turkish baths. Suddenly, one man picked up a chair and brought it down with tremendous force on the head of another man. The latter toppled and rolled down a dozen steps to the foot of the stoop, where he lay dead on the sidewalk in a great puddle of blood. The ladies all observed this with very little dismay, and long before the corpse was lugged away, they had returned to their evening chat. I lived on 10th Street for many years after 1969, but never again did I encounter this man, purple with rage, on this street again. A friend of mine who had come from Russia was acting as a caretaker for an older man with a breathing disability who lived alone in a large 2-story building in one of the rundown areas of our city. The building had once been something like a VFW hall, with the first floor being more like a warehouse area, and the second floor being an empty dance hall, complete with stage and bar. There was also a basement, and I believe, possibly an attic. The first floor had been partitioned into rooms by hanging large sheets where no actual walls existed. It was a dark, cavernous place with weird props like mannequins and paraphernalia from the World War II era strewn about. There were twisting stairways and little, hidden passages here and there. It was a classic, spooky place to begin with, but mostly from neglect. I can't remember exactly why we called it Goose Hall, as it had another name, but I think it was because there was a banner hung in front of the building at one time, referring to it as Goose Hall. It was a good name for a strange place. My friend, who I'll call Sergey, had taken the position of caring for this man, who we'll call Edward, as Sergey had little money and didn't mind the weirdness of the place, as it provided him with the room and board. Not many other people would have wanted this job. Not long after Sergey had moved in, he began to notice odd things, like lights being turned on that had previously been off, and pictures and clocks falling off walls by themselves. Since Edward was bedridden, Sergey knew it wasn't him doing it, but he found it annoying and puzzling. Then one night, around 2 a.m., he heard footsteps walking around on the second floor, overhead. He did nothing about it at the time, but told Edward the next day that he thought intruders, kids most likely, had broken into the house and were walking around. "That's the ghost," said Edward. "Don't worry, he won't bother you." Edward went on to explain that the ghost had always been there and did odd things like move stuff around or turn lights on and off. He further explained that the footsteps Sergey heard were also the ghost doing, and that sometimes the ghost also made sounds like boxes and cartons being pushed over on the second floor, even though the second floor was empty. This usually happened around 2 a.m. in the morning. Sergey, being an intelligent and educated man, believed nothing of this. He was convinced that it was teenagers breaking in and hanging out for kicks. He was determined to trap and confront them. Edward told him he was wasting his time and not to worry about it. For my part, I'd visited Sergey and Edward in this building, which was about a 30-minute drive from my house, and listened to his story intently as I'd witnessed phenomena before in my life and was hoping to see something manifest. However, in the times I visited, day or night, nothing ever happened. Sergey, however, as he was living there, frequently witnessed or heard some odd things, which he was still convinced was someone pulling a prank. Then one day, I went to visit and found Sergey in an agitated state. He wanted to tell me about what happened to him a couple of days previously. "I was staying up late," he began, quietly listening to some music. "About 2 a.m., I heard the footsteps walking overhead, and I grabbed a flashlight and ran to the stairwell, determined to catch the kids who were breaking in. There were no working lights in the second floor. I ran up the steps and onto the dance floor, where I could still hear the footsteps walking, and shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound. I was now directly illuminating the spot where the footsteps were, and I could still hear them, but there was no one there. Then, the footsteps suddenly stopped, turned in direction, and began walking straight towards me. I kept the flashlight on the source of the sound, and followed it as it approached me, but there was no one in the room but me. About 5 to 10 feet from me, the footsteps suddenly halted, while I continued to shine the light. "Were you scared?" I asked. "Yes," he replied, but I tried to think about it rationally, and decided that I wasn't going to be physically hurt, and that I couldn't let my emotions overwhelm me. So I decided the only thing to do was to turn around and to leave, which I did. Sergey said now that he was convinced that Edward was right and there was a ghost in the place, but that he would just ignore it from now on, like Edward did. As he was telling me the story, a chill went up my spine as I don't think I could have been quite that brave, especially in an eerie place like this. But I still wanted to experience the phenomena for myself, as a story is just a story, until something happens to give you your own proof. It was several months later that I got my wish. I was visiting Sergey one summer evening, and we talked late into the night, and he was playing some new CDs for me he had recently purchased. It was about 2 a.m., and I was standing next to the stereo quietly, listening to the music when it happened. I would have missed it entirely, except that Sergey got my attention and said, "Listen, there's the ghost." I want to give as thorough an explanation of what I experienced as possible, since it seems to me that there are some oddities as to how this type of phenomena is perceived. First off, the music that was being played was not as loud, as Sergey did not want to disturb Edward, who was in the adjacent room, probably about the level of background music in a department store. Secondly, I was in no way thinking about the ghost, and we hadn't even discussed it previously that evening. What I was hearing was the sound of boxes being pushed over and shoved on the floor above me. The entire manifestation lasted perhaps 10 to 15 seconds. What is hard to describe, and perhaps part of the reason I almost missed this, is that the sound seemed to be coming in some way from inside my head, rather than externally through my ears, and yet Sergey was hearing exactly the same thing as I was. It was like tuning into a different world, much the same way that you can imagine a conversation you have had with someone in recollection and hear the words being spoken inside your head, only in this case, it was much more amplified, and the recollection was being controlled by someone else. The best way I can put it is that the sounds were not located in the physical place where I was standing, but were somehow layered on top of it. There was also kind of an odd purity to the sounds I was hearing, as if they had been recorded on tape, enhanced, and a little reverb added. But the sense of these sounds being inside me made the possibility that someone was actually doing that unlikely. I remember asking Sergey if he wanted to grab a flashlight and go upstairs and look. He said no, but that I was welcome to go myself if I wanted. I declined, and that was that. The rather dramatic postscript to this recounting is that the phenomena continued on and off for the entire time that Sergey lived there, and he basically ignored it and lived with it. Then one evening, he heard a loud bang in the next room and went over to investigate, only to find that Edward had put a gun in his mouth and blown his brains out against the wall, leaving a note behind, apologizing, saying that he just couldn't take living in this condition anymore. The police, of course, immediately put Sergey through the ringer for hours until they were convinced he had nothing to do with it. They could see, as he told me later, that he was freaked out and shaken, and Edward's daughter, who lived elsewhere and knew that Sergey was taking care of her father, was contacted and apparently didn't feel that Sergey had anything to do with it. She felt that her father indeed had taken his own life, plus the fact that he left notes in his own hand for everybody. Edward's daughter allowed Sergey to stay for a few months in the building until he finally moved out. After Edward's death, all the manifestations in the house ceased immediately. I'd like to think that Edward finally evicted his nosy and pesky tenant once he was finally able to do it, so that Sergey wouldn't have to be in a haunted place. After all, that place had already given him enough bad memories. A final note on the story. I've had a little training in writing, so I've tried to make this retelling here a bit more dynamic than a simple narrative. However, nothing has been fictionalized except the names and the conversations as reported, as I recall them from memory. These incidents are all true and dynamic as they are. This is the way it happened. I have twin brothers called Chris and Gareth. They have bunk beds, and Chris sleeps on the top. On some nights, Chris will suddenly wake up for no reason, and while he's awake, he says he sees a body emerge from the ceiling. The body, which he can't see the whole of, will float down and lie on top of him. He can't make out facial features or any other features to the body. It's like a slightly shining image, but he can definitely see it. Then, the image will whisper to him, but he can't hear it. It's like if I spoke to him. It's like the floater, I think that's what we call him, is in him, passing the message mentally, like he already knows this information. The first time this happened, Chris was physically sick. The bed starts to rock slightly and gets fiercer and fiercer. This wakes his brother, and Gareth wakes because of the moving bed. Gareth jumps out of the bed, quite scared. He stands back and sees Chris lying as stiff as a board, staring up at the ceiling. Gareth runs down the stairs to drink some water. When he comes back up, Chris is asleep, as if nothing had happened, so Gareth does the same. The next day, Gareth tells me what happened when I came around to visit. I ask Chris, and he doesn't remember much except the body, the whisperings, and how he felt paralyzed. Later, when Gareth told Chris about the shaking, Chris did not believe him. I think it was because he was scared and didn't want it to be true. Well, we tell our mother about this, but she said it was just a dream and doesn't seem too worried about it. After so many times this has happened, I started to get worried about my brothers. It hasn't affected neither of them seriously, but it still plays on my mind, as I've done research and found out some information I wish I never looked up. This is a true story, which deeply disturbs us all. Thanks for reading. I was camping at Jeffreys Bridge in the Wharton Forest last July 4th with my daughter, son-in-law, and grandson. We got there on Friday afternoon to get a nice spot by the Wading River, and we were right on the riverbank. There were no other campers anywhere close by. Around 9 p.m., a thunderstorm was starting to roll in, and we secured things before the rain came. My grandson, Ryan, and I bedded down to the back of my Suburban, and his parents retired to their tent. Unfortunately, I had to pee really bad, and since the outhouse was quite a distance away, and there was no one around, I thought that I'd just go a reasonable distance away. We were in the woods. It was pitch dark, but the lightning was flashing pretty regularly, and I'd skewed about 10 paces with each flash until I figured I was far enough. As I was in the process of relieving myself, the lightning flashed again, and to my great embarrassment, a woman was walking across my front and 12 feet away. Even though it was only an instant, I got a strong image of this slender woman, dressed in a long dress with long sleeves and some sort of bonnet or bandana, with her hair in a bun and pulled back. She was moving fast in the direction of the river. Then it was dark, and being embarrassed, I turned back towards the light of the truck, and as I moved back, I started thinking, where did she even come from? There was literally no one even remotely close. Where was she going? In about 10 seconds, she'd be knee-deep in the river, and how the hell was she moving so fast in the dark woods? By the time that I got to the truck, I decided that what I'd seen was not of this world. I locked my doors, and fully expected to see a pale face at the window with each flash. I should mention that I am a retired U.S. Marine, Vietnam veteran, and drill instructor. I'm not quick to jump to rash conclusions. I thought I'd share. Thanks. This house that I lived in was built around 1920, and I had no clue what I was about to get myself into. From the day I set foot in my room, I felt utterly depressed. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the fact that nobody had slept or lived in that room before me, so it did not make me feel very welcomed. Or maybe it was my ghost. There were 2 rooms to upstairs, mine, and my best friend's Carrie. Anyway, the first 3 nights, while trying to fall asleep, I would feel as if someone was staring at me from one particular corner of the room. Of course, I kept looking over there, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing. I questioned my boyfriend if he felt something staring at him, and he said he did, but maybe it was from outside. I knew it wasn't. This happened every night. On the fourth day, the house held their first meeting, finally disclosing to the newcomers they thought the house was haunted. Believe it or not, I was very relieved to hear this. After all, I thought I was losing my mind. For the next 3 months, I refused to sleep in my room. I would sleep in Carrie's room. She had a twin bed we both squeezed onto. There was AC. It was North Carolina, but I still needed the protection of a blanket. One night, Carrie moved, which sort of woke me up. Then I felt someone playing with my second toe, the one next to the big toe. Someone was flicking my toe. I quickly grabbed the blanket I unintentionally kicked off and sweated out the rest of the night. My mom, who was capable of being a medium, like her mother, told me to sleep in my bed, that she was harmless. She said the girl stayed in the attic space between Carrie's and my bedroom, and the reason I felt so depressed was because she was, but that she was not malicious. Well, that was all well and good, but we had a man too. One night, while trying to sleep in my room, with all the lights on and the TV going, after 3 months, I sat on the edge of my bed, gathering my courage to turn everything off and go to bed. All of a sudden, footsteps plain as day walked across my room. I knew it was the male trying to freak me out, but I left and went into Carrie's room anyway. Carrie had the sighting of the girl, not me. Carrie was in her room getting ready for class. Everyone in the house was already gone. She heard someone coming up the stairs. Of course, she thought it was me. When she turned the corner, expecting to see me, she saw a female standing in front of my door instead. Then she vanished. We had many experiences in the house. People walking around, doors slamming, shadows moving. One of my good male friends saw the man ghost. He was the only one that did. The male was a kidder. He liked to tap you on the shoulder, walk across the rooms, and down the hallways. I even heard him talking to someone one day. I was up in my room, and he was downstairs. No one else was home at the time. I eventually just told him to go away and leave me here, and he did. One day, my other roommate and I decided to research the house's history. We came home and told the other roommates. That night, Carrie had stayed at her boyfriend's house, so I was the only one upstairs, sleeping comfortably in my own bed by then. Thank you. I tried to fall asleep, but heard knocking on the wall. I sat up, thinking it was the cats. The banging stopped. I laid back down. It continued. I then heard a door slam. I got up to get the cats, who only stayed upstairs, and bring them into my room. I searched the whole upstairs, calling out to them, but they were nowhere. I decided to look downstairs. Nowhere. I had one roommate who was very allergic to cats. That is why we kept them upstairs. We kept our door closed, just in case they got out. For some reason, I decided to look in there for them, and they were there. Somehow, the ghost opened the door and shut them in there. I have no idea how. I brought them up to my room, shut them in there, and the knocking stopped. I have many stories while living there, one of which is too freaky, and not many people believe it. Carrie's sister came to visit. We decided we would perform the sort of cleansing to make the ghost girl happy. We walked to the attic door. I placed my hand on the door just to point out where we think the girl hides out, and this energy just shot up my arm and made me just sob. At first it was like I couldn't take my hand off. All I could say was, "She is so sad." Finally, I got my hand off and stopped crying at once. We gathered some candles and things from family members, which held sentimental value to us, and placed them in front of the attic door. Then we sat down, with me in the middle, held hands, and closed our eyes. We concentrated on emitting love and peace. I opened my eyes at one point to see the flames of the candles reaching so high up. Once we completed the cleansing, the flames were back to normal. During this cleansing, Carrie said in her mind she saw a girl lying on a bed, just crying, but we have no idea why. Well, we tried to make her happy, and I didn't feel as depressed after that, but she became a little more active. I think we made a mistake, and I'll never presume to do that again. I will call in the professionals if I am ever in that situation. So, that is my story. Well, just a couple of them. Thanks for reading. I experienced the much dreaded sleep paralysis. There is, however, one other story worth mentioning. In 1991, I was a 20-year-old Army corporal stationed in Germany. By this time, I was a graduate of French commando school and was in charge of my own cavalry recon squad, a jeep with 2 other guys. One chilly winter night, my unit was deployed somewhere in southwestern Germany in the wilderness during field exercises. We were literally in the middle of nowhere. Me and my crew spent half the night slinking through the woods, doing the usual cavalry-style patrols. At around 2 a.m., we were told to stop the jeep and set up a listening post in a clump of trees. I decided to be the first watch of the night, while the other 2 guys got some sleep. After about 30 minutes of staring into black nothingness, I decided to get up and walk around a bit. With a weapon in hand and a radio on my back, I began to prowl around the area. Yes, it was unbelievably dark, but at least this was keeping me occupied. Suddenly, a very average night turned into a encounter I will never forget. After several minutes of walking, I suddenly realized how quiet the night was. Not a sound to be heard from an animal or even an insect. Thinking this was a bit strange, I walked a few more paces before realizing I was right in the middle of a very old deserted village. I pulled out my night vision goggles and noticed that the village consisted of about 7 or 8 old stone houses. Only the walls remained, as the old thatched roofs were long gone. Suddenly, I felt this dark, evil presence like a weight on my shoulders. I knew I was being watched by someone or something, and I knew that I was not welcome in this place. I slowly turned around and began walking back the way I came, with every footstep in the tall, dry grass sounding like a firecracker. It was very slow and painful walking out of this place. I consider myself a rational person, but was truly scared as I made the long walk back to the jeep. Needless to say, I spent the rest of the night inside the jeep. As you read the stories on the site, it may be hard to appreciate the feelings others have felt if they try to tell their tales. I promise you, the fear and sixth sense we have felt during these tales are the most important part of the story. Hi, my name's Brooke. I work at an assisted living facility in Pennsylvania. I worked the 11/7 shift, so of course, there are a lot of stories about the place already. But besides that, I was wondering if the experiences I've had, as insignificant as they may seem or be, could be the activities of ghosts, or just my mind. Of course, I'm not the only one that claims to have seen things, but who knows? For instance, I'll just be walking around the building, and I constantly think that I see things, like out of the corner of my eye. It's not a definite thing, it's just a shape. It's either black or white. A lady I work with always sees black when she sees things out of the corner of her eye. As for me, I always see white. The forms are white, that is. Is there a reason she sees black and I see white? And today, for instance, I was walking and I was sure there was someone behind me. When I semi-turned around, out of the corner of my eye, I swore there was a figure for a split second, but it was gone. It scared me to death, actually. That is why I'm writing to you today, because today, that was the closest a form or figure has ever been. No one has ever died in this facility that I work in, but they have died in the hospital. The building has only been open for 4 years, maybe 5. I was just wondering if these could be ghosts, or just my eyes playing tricks on me. A lot of the residents say that they see a woman in white in their room, or sitting on their bed. I don't know how to explain or take that either, but I appreciate your reading. Thanks for listening as well. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me directly and has forever changed my view on the supernatural. I would like to state for the record that I've always been a skeptical person who never believed in anything that couldn't be proven. Before my experience, I didn't believe in ghosts and had never given the topic a second thought. Since that period of time, it has always been on my mind frequently. This is my story. The event in question occurred several years ago at my grandparents' house. I was 19. I'd been out with my friends and returned home around 2 a.m. I retired to my bedroom on the second floor of the house and got into bed. I'd been lying there for 2 or 3 minutes, reflecting on the events of the evening, when suddenly I heard the muffling screaming of a woman coming from the basement. Almost immediately, the screaming began to slowly ascend the stairs, and within a minute had reached the first floor. It continued to ascend the stairs, and 30 seconds later had reached the second floor and was right outside of my room. The screaming was very loud and was clearly that of a woman. My bedroom door was closed, and I could therefore see nothing. The screaming continued outside of my room for approximately 1 minute, and then slowly began to descend the stairs into the basement. When it reached the basement, the screaming ceased, and the house was silent. That is the end of my story. I feel that in order for me to give an objective account of this occurrence, it is important that I detail my own actions and opinions. When I first heard the noise, I recognized that it was coming from the basement, and although it sounded like a woman screaming, I immediately disregarded this as being ridiculous. I started to try and rationalize what I was hearing. However, my analysis ended rather abruptly when I realized that the noise was getting closer. By the time I reached the first floor, it had become quite loud, and being unable to think of any rational explanation for such a noise, I became convinced that the ghost of a woman was ascending the stairs of my grandparents' house. I became completely terrified and quickly sat up in bed, both so that I could hear better and so that I could run, if necessary. When it reached the second floor and was outside my room, every hair in my body was standing on end, and my hands were literally shaking with fear. I was too scared to move, and for that reason, remained stationary until it returned to the basement and the noise subsided. I stayed where I was for several minutes, waiting for the noise to return. When it didn't, I got up, turned on my light, and sat back down on my bed. Being wide awake and in no mood to sleep, I spent the next couple of hours lying in my bed, listening and thinking about what had happened. Eventually I fell asleep, and the next morning, when I woke up, my light was still on, and I was completely convinced that I had heard a ghost. I spent the entire day gathering information and trying to figure out what I had heard. The only other people in the house were my grandparents. My grandmother is a sound sleeper, and my grandfather is hard of hearing. They heard nothing. They bought the house in 1966 and sold it in 2000. During that time, they never heard anything that even remotely resembles what I described. My mother lived in the house for several years in her late teens and never heard anything either. I myself lived in the house on and off for years and never heard anything before, and have not heard anything since. I consider that maybe the pipes or something else in the house made the noise, although I don't think any pipe on earth could have made the noise I heard. I dismiss this theory anyways, because if the house did make odd noises, someone would have heard them in the past 30 years. I also dismiss the wind, because I've spent many windy nights in the house and heard absolutely nothing. In the end, I came to the conclusion that there was no earthly explanation for what I heard, and that what I experienced must have been supernatural. It sounds crazy saying that, but I know what I heard. I will never forget it. I'm sure it was a ghost. In conclusion, I would just like to state that all of my friends think I was asleep and that the whole thing was a dream. I would like to touch on this briefly. The first thing I would like to say is that I know I was not asleep. Here's my case. I'd been in bed for 2 or 3 minutes, less than 5 for sure, and was laying on my back thinking. I've always had a difficult time falling asleep. It usually takes me 20 to 30 minutes, and I've never been able to sleep on my back. At the time, I was making no attempt to sleep, but was lying there, thinking. Secondly, no matter how real a dream seems, you always wake up afterwards, and that's how I know you were dreaming. I don't think it's possible to remember a dream without waking up and realize you are dreaming. If it is, it's never happened to me. If it had been a dream, I would have woken up and said, wow, that one was weird. That never happened. I was awake. Thirdly, I turned the light on after the occurrence, and it was still on when I woke up in the morning. I know for a fact that I was awake. That is my story, and I swear to you that every word of it is the truth. I don't know if you will believe me. No one else will, but I swear it's the truth. I am 17 years old. In the past 7 years, I lived in 3 different houses, and every one of them had a ghost. The first one we lived in was from 94 to 96. The occurrence that spooked me there happened in my parents' room. A week before anything weird happened, a bunch of knickknacks fell off of my mother's headboard. So, she put it back and pushed it away from the edge. On Easter morning of 95, I was with my brother, sister, and dad, watching TV in the living room. About 20 feet away from my parents' bedroom door, I heard a bang, and my mom came running out of her room. She really wanted to know who was pounding. Apparently, when I heard the bang, all the stuff had fallen off her headboard and kind of flew off this time. Not only that, but this Oreo tin can she had looked like it had been stepped on. After that, our next door neighbor told us that she had seen this old man that lived here before us in the backyard on the day he died in the hospital. Now, the living room looked into a hallway. In the hallway, you could see into my brother's room, and my parents was right next door. The living room had a clear view of my parents' room. One night, my dad fell asleep in the living room. He was sleeping, facing the hallway. He suddenly woke up and looked into his room. He saw this cloud of smoke billowing in the hallway, moving towards his room. He jumped up and yelled fire. When he yelled, my brother woke up and saw this. The cloud settled in the hallway and disappeared. I know this was not any kind of imagination because my brother and my dad are very logical and analytical people, and they both witnessed this. In the next house, it was never anything really. The only occurrence that happened was the night one of our cats died. The cat house was in the corner of my room, and I had a nightlight next to the cat house. I looked up to the top cat house, and I saw the shadow of our dead cat. The cat loved sleeping on the top every night, and this night was no exception. The third house is the house we have lived in for the past 3 years. I believe it all started with the woman. My dad wakes up early in the morning to get ready for work. When this happened, my mom would occasionally fall asleep in the living room. There's a door next to the entryway that leads into the back hallway where all the rooms are. The first room is my brother's, the second is my parents', then you turn, and then comes my sister's room, and lastly, mine. Now, on this morning, my dad woke me up and looked over. He saw the back of a woman and assumed it was my mom. He got up and went out into the living room and saw my mom sleeping on the couch. He went back to his room and no one was there. After that, I had an experience with a man. It was about 4 in the morning and I was suddenly woken up by the feeling of a large man tapping my foot. I looked up and no one was there. I have this ticker stuffed animal that I got for my birthday from my sister. At the time of my next story, my large dog slept in my room with me. He would sleep up against the door so I couldn't sleepwalk and open it without waking up. I woke up one morning and my ticker was nowhere, so I figured it rolled under the bed. I opened my door and it was laying outside of my door. About a year ago, my mom started sleeping out in the living room for health reasons. The wall our couch leans against is connected to my brother's room. We had a family friend staying in there while my brother was in boot camp. One morning, my mom woke up about 7 a.m. She heard a knocking on the wall between the living room and my brother's room. She thought it was just our friend when it moved to the wall behind her computer about 10 feet away. This is an inside wall and there's no way there could be any knocking. It then moved to the ceiling. She said it sounded like someone knocking. A couple nights later, I heard her banging in my parents' room. Their bathroom is across the hall from my brother's room. My bathroom is across from my sister's room, and the bathtub stalls are back to back. When I heard the banging, it sounded like it was coming from the wall where the shower head is, and they have a lot of shelves over there, so it would be impossible to bang as clearly as I heard. A couple of hours later, I heard shuffling footsteps in the hall, coming from the bathroom. On 2 occasions, my dad has seen a streaking white figure that appears to be a cat, but we are not positive. We have also seen shadow people walking in the side yard through our shutters. Not long ago, our next door neighbor told us that the houses in our neighborhood was built on Indian burial ground. We are not sure if this has anything to do with all this. The house we live in now appears to be the most haunted so far. I'm 17 years old, and I used to live in an old house, made in 1921, in Haverhill, Massachusetts, that I know is haunted. One day, when I was 10, I was in my upstairs bedroom with my 2 sisters coloring. I think that's when it started. We were home alone when we heard the closet at the end of the stairs slide open. Then we heard it slide back. The sliding doors of the closet always made a loud rumbling noise when it was open. When we heard it that day, we didn't get scared at first because we thought my mom had gotten home from work, so we ran downstairs to greet her to find that nobody was home. We looked around and then looked outside to see if the car was in the driveway, but we were alone, or so we thought. We ran back upstairs to our room and grabbed shoes and hangers for the so-called protection. Then all of a sudden, we heard footsteps racing up the stairs, then back down. We never saw anything actually reach the top of the stairs, but they ran up and down repeatedly, about 10 times, then it stopped. We were so scared, we just sat there crying, waiting to hear more, but nothing else happened. Then, when I was 15, I was taking care of a dog, and when I brought it to the foot of the stairs, he froze and just stared at the top. I didn't think much about it, so I picked him up and brought him up the stairs to my room and closed the door. The dog then began crying, and he seemed to be getting nervous and uneasy, and he started scratching at the door. When I opened the door to let him out, he ran down the steps so fast that by the time I got out the door, he was gone. After that, many more things started to happen. I woke one morning to hear something or someone dragging themselves on the rug next to my bed. I was so frozen with fear that I didn't even look to see what it was. The cabinets in our kitchen would open and slam shut by themselves. I could also hear the silverware jiggling and slamming inside the drawers. There are even moments where the computer keyboard would also type by itself. I've also had my foot slapped and have felt something sit on me while I was laying in my bed. There are also too many noises and weird things to explain, and also creepy dreams. So I'm glad to be out of that house. Well, I would like to know if the house has some kind of history or if anybody died there. Last year, after we moved out of that house, our cousins were sleeping over and we were talking about our old house. One of my cousins, who slept over our house a lot, asked why our dad always walked up to our room and why he did it over and over without ever coming into our room. We told him about the day we heard the racing footsteps running up the stairs, and she got so freaked out. My other cousin also said she hated sleeping in our room because she always heard those same footsteps coming up the stairs but never making it to the top before it ran back down again. Now in our present house in Orlando, Florida, weird things have suddenly begun to happen. Noises, shadowy figures, and also short wide figures have appeared. I always seem to see something in the corner of my eye. When I turn my head to look, there is nothing there. And my sister felt somebody whistle and blow in her ear. Well, that's all I have for you for today. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for reading. Hello, my name is Nikki, and I'm 14 years old. Unfortunately, I don't remember the details to my story very well because it happened when I was about 4 or 5 years old. But anyway, my family lived in a large house that was actually quite old. One night, I was asleep in my bedroom upstairs, and I awoke in the middle of the night. I went straight across the hall to my brother's room and asked him to come downstairs with me because I was scared and wanted to sleep with Mom and Dad. He asked me why I was so scared, and I said I didn't know. So he came down with me. We started down the stairs, and I froze at the sight of what I saw. there was a little boy at the end of the stairs. Now, this could have been my younger brother, but my brother was just a few months old. This little boy had brown hair and was just sitting at the bottom of the stairs. I wasn't scared, so we kept walking. We got into my parents' room, and I was getting ready to climb in their bed, and all the lights in the house came on at once. My dad woke up and checked the circuit breaker, but nothing was wrong, so he went through the house and shut off all the lights. Well, the next night, I saw the same little boy, and the same thing happened again. This activity continued for a few more days, and my parents checked out some information by the guy that lived there before. He said a little boy around the age of 5 died because he was very sick. He died in the middle of the night in his sleep, and a few hours before he went to sleep, he turned all the lights in the house on because he was afraid of the dark. I have never seen anything since, even though I've moved several times. I always somehow sense when there is an unknown presence around them, but I'll always remember that night. I've since been afraid of the dark, though I hate to admit it, but it's not like anyone is going to criticize me for it. And this is a true story. This happened to me when I was 8 years old. I'm now 28, with 3 kids of my own. It happened in my hometown of Soak Village, Illinois, which is known to be a place that Indians pass through using South Trail to get to other destinations. At least, that's what the official story is. There are others, like myself, who believe more. We believe that Indians actually settled there, if only for brief periods of time. There's always been talk of bones being found when a pool is dug up or a garden was put in, but most say it's just that. Talk. Not me. I believe it. I also not only believe, but know that the ground the Soak Village is residing on is sour, cursed, beyond anybody's wildest dreams. And I have many stories to support that belief. But for now, I will start with my first story of proof. It was a cold, normal night in the season of autumn, cold enough to keep you inside your house and snuggled under a blanket. I was doing exactly that. An 8-year-old can only do so much during these times, and I chose to do my homework so I could read later. I'd been listening to a Rick Springfield album on 8-track. I was playing it on my 2XL robot toy. This was a toy that you could put 8-track cartridges in that was made by the company to be a sort of trivia game. You'd play the cartridge, and it would ask you questions and tell you jokes. It had 2 big red robot eyes that flashed red when you were correct. It had 3 buttons you could push to answer your questions. 2XL could also play normal 8-track music, and of course, its red robot eyes flashed in time with the music. So it was doing exactly just that on that cold autumn night, flashing its eyes to Rick Springfield, and I was quite contented. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor of my house and faced north, along with my bed. I had a window north of me and east of me. Of course, it was dark outside, but it was so warm inside and so very comforting. Every now and again, I'd look up from my homework and just look out into the darkness. No reason. It was just something I did. Well, this was the last time I ever did that again in that house. As I was sitting there, all of a sudden, I felt instantly cold, and every single hair in my body was raised. My blood felt like it had ran cold and decided to just stop pumping through my body. My heart was racing. I was perfectly terrified, and I didn't even know why. Yet, my 2XL was suddenly stuck, and it kept playing the same verse from Rick over and over. Hole in my heart. And its eyes weren't flashing anymore. No, they were just burning bright red, blood red. Then I felt this magnetic pull, like something was pulling me to my right. I turned my right head and looked out the east window, and saw something that haunted me for the rest of my life. Sitting just barely outside my window, levitating, was the most horrifying image I'll ever see in my life. A creature, about 2 feet tall, but sitting Indian style. His skin was snowy white, and you could see the outlines of his bones because he was that skinny. He wore some sort of white cloth draped sideways on his body. This is why I later named him Gandhi Monster. My young mind thought his skinny body and his white cloth looked like the real Gandhis did. This creature's head was too big for his body. His two horrible, big dark eyes were piercing my soul as he stared at me. He opened his mouth and grinned a grin at me that haunted my dreams for years. His mouth was full of long, snarly, razor-sharp looking teeth, dripping with blood. I don't know how a mouth could fit so many nasty teeth into it, but it did. I watched as the blood dripped from his teeth and slid down his chin and onto his white cloth diaper shorts. He raised his hands and reached for me. The fingernails were at least 4 inches long, gnarled looking, and sharpened to points, also dripping with blood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I was locked into place by his piercing eyes. I couldn't breathe. I felt as if my brain was being scrambled and my soul was being raped. His grin became larger, and he opened his mouth wider. He kept looking at me, as if he knew me, as if he had been waiting for me. He started to lift his arms, and it looked as if in seconds he would actually be inside my room and not just outside my window. All traces of reason disappeared, and my mind snapped. I still don't know how I did it, but I managed to tear my gaze away and leap off the bed and out my bedroom door, screaming with every inch of my soul, all in like 2 seconds. I could feel him pulling me. I could feel that horrible stare penetrating my back as I screamed down the hallway to my mother. Of course, when her and my father and younger brother came back, it was gone. But they knew I saw something, and they did not try to tell me it was my imagination. They comforted me and taped up all the windows in my room. They actually had to pull down all the shades and seal all sides with duct tape. I couldn't even sleep in that room for almost a year. My brother even remembers coming into the room with my parents afterwards. The Gandhi Monster was a story we didn't often tell, but it always brought fear to speak of it, to us and to others. My parents never spoke of it again either. As I grew up, I tried to face my fear and sleep in that room, but never did I sleep with my back to a window. Never. 18 years later, I moved to Florida with my own little family, and I found peace within myself. But I'll never manage to forget that creature, and I'll never sleep or sit with my back to a window, and I will never forget the one thing I heard it say to me in my mind as I was running out of my bedroom door. Someday, I'm coming back. Hey, I'm in my mid-teens, and I've experienced ghostly encounters. The one that really freaked me out was when me and my family moved to Scotland. For a few months, we lived in chalets. Me and my older sister shared one on our own. A few weeks after we moved in, we began to feel uncomfortable and felt as if we were being watched there, and there was also a threatening atmosphere. We told our parents, and they said it was just because we were next to the graveyard. A few weeks later, I was lying in my bed with the door open when a tall, dark figure stood, leaning over me. I didn't think at that particular moment, but it wasn't until my sister asked me if I felt somebody was in my room the previous night. We started to talk, and she too felt as if somebody tall was leaning over her. I then started to sleep in my sister's room, and the figure didn't return, so I moved back into my own room. But then again, the figure returned this time. It was kneeling beside me. The next morning I told my sister, and again, she felt the presence of a tall man. Our dad told us that the large house next to us was where the Vikers used to stay until the house was sold. One night, my mom came in, and she was holding 2 necklaces with crosses on it. Me and my sister aren't religious, so her mom thought it had something to do with that. So we went to bed, holding the crosses. That night, it was very uncomfortable in both rooms. After that, we haven't felt the presence of the tall man. The figure that visited did so on a few occasions. Each time, it felt as though it was getting closer and more angry. When the crosses were given to us that night, the figure seemed very angry. Its face was literally pressed into mine, and it felt as if he was gritting his teeth at me. My sister also had this very uncomfortable, menacing figure who was pressed into her face. All you could do was hide under the guilt, closing your eyes really tight, and hope you'd fall asleep quick. Since that last visit, nothing has returned, and we've since moved then, and nothing. We don't even use the crosses anymore. Other things that we didn't think of as being connected at the time now do seem connected, such as the chalet that Mom and Dad were in, although the same, was different in feeling. Because Mom and Dad's chalets always had a comfy feeling, yet ours didn't. Whether it was because there was just me and my sister alone in there, and it was our imaginations or not, we don't know. Although in Mom's and Dad's chalet, there was only one more person over there. From the moment we stepped into the chalet, it was always cold, even with the heaters on. Plus, there was often a bad smell wafting around, a lot like fish, rotten. This was only in my bedroom, possibly me, my sister says. Also in my room, there was a strange noise of scratching, as if someone was sketching or writing. This noise accompanied the presence of another figure, smaller in stature and of the female sex. My sister also felt the smaller presence, but not the noise. She only came once, very different, not menacing, quiet in nature, and much older. She was almost a comfort, but it's still not nice to be watched over at night by ghostly figures. It's strange, because we didn't actually see anything, yet you get so much from these feelings, the sex, age, angry, happy, etc. Plus, we get almost exactly the same feelings. But is it just our imagination? Are we certifiably insane? Are we demented? No, we definitely feel we had a visitor. Previous to this experience, my sister had not really believed in it, ghostly visits and such, but now, I think she has had a change of mind. Me, myself, I've always believed. My mom's granddad often visits, a kind presence, bringing good luck, such as when she was having problems. He visits to let us know everything will be okay. He often visited when we were babies, watching over our cots. Our dad also saw what appeared to be him. Whenever he visits, we know him by the distinct smell of putty. He used to repair windows. So really, we are used to the visits, although my sister had never experienced any until now. Unfortunately, it wasn't a happy experience, one not to forget. Happened to surf onto your website, and I just wanted to let you know that I saw Resurrection Mary in Justice, Illinois, back in October of '92. After getting off of work at 3 a.m. from a chemical plant, Whitco Corporation, near 51st and Central in Chicago. I was driving by that particular cemetery at about 3:30 a.m. on my way home from work. Driving by, but initially not thinking much of the sight, as there was a nightclub with women of ill repute nearby. I saw a woman in a light blue or white palm dress standing by the trunk of what looked like a black park limousine at the front SW Cemetery driveway off Archer Avenue to the cemetery. I slowed down quite a bit to get a better look at the odd sight, but then drove off. I thought it was probably a prostitute with her John. However, looking back at my mirror, maybe a second later, the woman and the limo were gone. Let me reassure you that there was no way that I would have missed the limo driving off in that second that it took me to look back in the mirror. They weren't on the road or in the cemetery because I looked for taillights. The cemetery gates are pretty large, and it would have taken a great effort and time to open both of the cemetery gates for the car to get through. I did not think much of the incident until a few days later. I was talking with some of my employees that lived in the area near the cemetery. Two of my employees mentioned that I'd probably seen the ghost called Resurrection Mary. I didn't much believe in ghosts until that incident, and I'm still somewhat skeptical, but I cannot fully explain what I saw that night. That incident is still vivid in my memory, and kinda creepy to think about it, to this day. Ever since I can remember, I've always had an interest in ghost stories. That is why I'm writing you this letter. No, I don't have a ghost in my house. A friend of mine told me about this place at least 10 months ago. I was so amazed at this story, I asked if he would take me to this place. No one really ever goes there. I guess because it's so creepy and dark looking at night, but during the day, it is okay. Nothing strange happens. Well, first, before I tell you more about this place, let me tell you the story of why it is so unusual. The city is called Lake Forest, California, and they call it Canyon Creek, I guess, because it is nothing but canyon and wide open spaces of nothing but rocks and wildlife. The story goes back 30 years ago, of a lady who was in her 40s. Nobody knew what her name was. She lived alone with her two Great Dane dogs. She was very rich and owned all of the canyon, which is like miles and miles of land. This lady never married and had no children. It was just her dogs and herself. She lived in this trailer park home, and it was not a pretty house by any stretch of the imagination. Well, about 6 years later, the story goes that a police officer got a call about the lady and her dogs. The officer went to the lady's home and knocked at the door, and no one answered. The officer ended up breaking down the door, and what he found next was horrifying. It is said that the officer found the lady dead. Nothing was left but her decaying body, and her bones were visible. Worst of all, laying right next to her were her dogs. They had both died as well. Now, on to the paranormal part. People who have never been to this place don't know what to expect if they come into this place. It's unpredictable. Sometimes, when you go back to the area where she passed, you'll notice paranormal phenomena. Other times, you won't. A man was driving alone on the canyon by himself one night, and the story goes that he saw the presence of the lady standing at the side of the road with her two dogs. The man did not stop at all to give the lady a ride. He just kept going. This other story was told by my friend. My friend told me that his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend went up there one night to check it out. They stopped where the lady's house was. They were only there about 15 minutes away when they were just talking and listening to music. Then, all of a sudden, they heard a knock on the side door of the driver's seat. They both turned to look, and they saw the lady standing there, knocking on the window. She was dressed in all white and covered in blood. They also saw the dogs nearby as well, far off into the distance, appearing as silhouettes. They sat there in shock for 3 minutes, horrified by what they just saw. For some reason, the lady was still knocking at the driver's side of the window, but in reality, it was really not that long. They both said that she must have been there about 40 seconds. After that, my friend said they never returned back there. That was not the only story that happened to anyone. There are far more. What I would like to know is, who is this lady and why is she doing this? There's something more to why she has to haunt people who have done nothing to her. Maybe it is because she does not want anyone on her land that she loves so much. What could it be? Here's my email address. If you have any questions, please feel free to get a hold of me. I would like at least some kind of feedback on this story. Please, I beg you. I'm so confused, and I'm scared. Please let me know what is going on. I find this intriguing. When I was 12, my family moved to a newer house, about 10 miles away from where I grew up. The house was 7 years old, and no one had ever died there. From the start, I would hear footsteps in the carpeting, and I always felt that I was being watched, especially when I played her piano. That was the extent of my experiences until I was in my early 20s. One evening, my sister and I were sitting in the den talking. It was spring, and the temperature was perfect, so all the windows were closed, and the air was off. Suddenly, in the back of the room, where there were a lot of plants sitting together, one plant in the middle started shaking furiously. My sister and I looked at each other and went into the other room. A few weeks later, my mother and I were sitting alone in the house when it sounded like someone very roughly raked their fingernails down a couch in the back of the room, which was in sight. And again, a plant that was sitting at the end of the couch started shaking ferociously. My mother just would not admit that we were being visited, even though she'd witnessed it firsthand. The last time anything paranormal happened was on a Friday afternoon. I was in my mother's room, talking to her, when I noticed that atmosphere had seemed to grow heavy, and I got chills. As the afternoon wore on, the feeling increased until I couldn't stand to go into the room any longer. That evening, my sister and I were alone and watching TV. I had gone to the fridge for a snack and felt the heaviness with the goosebumps on the left side of it. I told my sister that the ghost was in the kitchen. I could feel it. A few minutes later, a picture that was hanging in the kitchen fell off of the wall. When we got the nerve up, my sister and I went to another door in the kitchen on the opposite side of the room. We walked in and stood there, seeing and feeling nothing. Suddenly, the hair on our arms literally stood up, and we had to run out. Immediately afterwards, it left, and hasn't been back. I don't even feel like I'm being watched while playing the piano. I guess whatever it was only wanted to communicate, but I was too frightened. I felt the heaviness with chills in other places, but until the last few years, I hadn't seen any entities. I've moved twice, and really don't believe the houses were haunted, but internally, and for short periods of time, I believe there were entities present. I've seen a man with long salt and pepper hair, with a dark cloak looking at me, with bright, colorless eyes. It looked like a negative of a photo. Also, I've seen a bright, elongated white shape out of the corner of my eye, around my bed, several times. The most profound experience I've ever had was when I was visited by the spirit of a friend who had died a week before his 16th birthday. Also 10 years later, I started having dreams with him there, and I'll wake up with the most wonderful feeling of being loved. During one of these dreams, I was at home alone during the day and had to sleep because I was working nights. It was a little warm, but not enough for the air. I had 2 blankets in my bed and threw one in the floor, and the other one was a mess because I had been tossing and turning. I finally made it back to sleep and dreamed of my friend. I got too hot and woke up to find the blanket I tossed on the floor laid over me very neatly. I've had too many experiences to discount anything to just chance, and my mother is finally admitting that she has experienced the paranormal. I live in Tucson, Arizona. Shortly north of the city lies Mount Lemmon. This peak is a great forested 7,000-foot getaway from the desert city. I had my brother and 2 friends over at my place at about 1 a.m. a few months ago, and after a few hours of boredom, we decided to go to Mount Lemmon and enjoy some nice, cool night air. I would often take the 45-minute trip to wind down and watch the stars, so this is a very familiar place. The trip started off very normal. Our first stop was without occurrences. The next stop, I became mildly aware of a presence. This is nothing new to me, however, so I ignored it. By the third stop, we got out again. My brother and our friend Steve stayed in the car, and my friend Thea and I went for a walk. After a short discussion about friend trouble, she interrupted and said she kept seeing a shadowed figure from the top of a nearby peak. I told her that something was watching us, but not to worry, because I didn't sense hostility. We started the walk back and kept hearing the sound of scattered gravel and an extra set of footsteps on the other side of me. This was at first amusing, because we knew at this time we had gained a friend that was not from around here. By the time we got to the car, Thea panicked, and when we got in, my brother and Steve spoke of the shadowy figures they saw. We smiled, started the car, and drove down the mountain. As we spoke about what we saw and what we felt, it was decided that we would stop again. We pulled off at a scenic view of a canyon area where we found a newer Ford Bronco with the engine running, the dome light on, and no one in or around the vehicle. This was unsettling, but could surely be explained, no matter how far-fetched the explanation. We stayed here for about 10 minutes. After the first couple of minutes, my brother and I simultaneously noticed a large dark mass above the peak where we were being watched earlier. Thea saw the figures on the top of the peak. I could see the mass disappear, as if moving down the mountain towards us. Thea said the figures were walking down the mountainside. No one was scared at this point. We're all very amused. When I could no longer see the mass, I was only able to see it above the mountain because the sky posed as a backdrop. We all got a wave of panic. Gravel started swirling around everywhere, and Thea and Jason ran for the car. I was stunned, so I was the last to get there. Jason entered the car from the other side, but his heavy trench coat was flipped over his head as he opened the door. We started the car and sped down the mountain. We spoke with Steve about what we saw, and he said he saw the same shadow figures that Thea had seen. We pulled over one last time without getting out of the car to show Steve the black mass that was causing all of the commotion. We then kept driving until we reached the city again. The whole way down, seeing cars pulled to the side, some with dome lights on, never with anyone in or around them. This is very odd for 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Furthermore, vehicles are not allowed to park on the road after 10 p.m. The next night, Thea and I returned. We never got out of the car this time. However, every time we cut the engine in all power, We hear scratching underneath the car, and eventually, it would start to rock. We pulled over 4 times, and this happened every time. Finally, the 5th time, we decided to get out of the car before that happened, so we would have enough guts to see what else would happen. Once again, we didn't make it. We opened the doors and pointed our flashlights outside, and as soon as we did, gravel started swirling around louder than before. There was no wind, and we watched it jump around as if someone was kicking it right in front of us. After this trip, it turned out that the brakes in front of the left of the car, where we heard the scratching from where the car was off, were worn down badly. However, the rest of the brakes were completely fine. We stumped the mechanic, but once again, this is something that may be explained. I just don't know how. I'm planning a return trip, well equipped now. I'll bring a camera, several flashlights, and a video recorder. Depending on the outcome of this trip, I will forward any eventful messages to your site. I'm stuck wondering 2 things now. First off, what is this entity? There are no local legends that I've found about Mount Lemon. Second off, will it be there again when I visit next week? I hope so. There's so much more I would like to learn before it just becomes a memory. I was stationed at Ford Island, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, in the early 1980s. I was a corpsman assigned to the hospital there, which at the time was only an aid station, kept there because of the brig on the other side of the island. I spent many nights in the large hospital, alone. They only used a small area in the ER. All throughout the night, you could hear people moving around, and doors opening and windows closing. I would walk around looking for the source of the sounds, but no one else was there. Many people died there December 7th, and many years after that. More than one night, I woke up thinking someone was watching me, and a few nights, I was awakened by the sound of the ER doors closing by themselves. I'd even seen the presence of an old man wandering the halls from a distance, except it looked like he was floating and was missing a leg. There was always this hospital room that smelled rancid, even though it was supposed to be the cleanest room. Every time I'd walk by there, I'd see a dark fog sitting there through the corner of my eye. I would then completely look into the room, and the fog would disappear instantly. I've never written about this before. There were about 20 others who had duty there, and some men and women would pay me to take their duty so that they would not have to sleep there. I was so shocked to see that no one had reported it on their list in Hawaii. Ford Island has many suicides and strange deaths, from people driving their cars off the runway to a group of ski divers landing on rocks just off the coast. My husband and I took our 2 children to Florida to visit his parents this past Christmas. Since his parents live in a small 2-bedroom condo, there wasn't room for all of us to sleep there. My mother-in-law has some friends with a condo about 3 or 4 miles from her building, and they primarily use it for furnished rental. It happened to be unoccupied at the time, so she made arrangements for my husband and me to sleep there. The first night we went over to go to bed, I noticed some dark shadows moving around the apartment, but just out of the corners of my eyes. I've seen spirit shadows before, and they do not look like regular room shadows. They're darker and more solid appearing. I didn't pay too much attention at first, didn't realize what I was seeing, I guess, until I got up early the next morning and went outside onto the apartment's small balcony. I saw something light-colored go through the kitchen, and assumed my husband had come out of the bedroom. But when I went back into the apartment, he was in the bathroom and had not come into the kitchen at all. While I was getting dressed, I saw something small and black retreat under the closet door in the bedroom. I thought at first it was a roach, rare, as they are in the nice 5th floor Florida condos. It was not impossible. I pulled back the closet door, and there was nothing in the closet but pale gray carpeting on the floor and empty hangers on the rod. I began to have my suspicions, but kept them to myself. That night, my husband stayed at his mother's with our younger child, and my oldest son, age 13, came back to the borrowed apartments with me since we were going fishing very early the next morning. He put his stuff down in the smaller bedroom, then came out in the hallway and asked me who else was in the apartment. I said we were alone. Why did he ask? He told me he had just seen something go through his bedroom. Well, that clinched it for me, but I kind of brushed it off, not wanting to scare him. I did leave my light on all night though. I saw the dark shadows up near the top of the bedroom door several times. The next night, when my husband and I arrived, I went into the master bedroom, and as I entered the room, I felt this wave wash over me, sort of a combination of curiosity, irritation, and loneliness. Who are you? Why are you here? And where have you been? I decided I did not feel up to trying to communicate with this entity on its terms. Not that I've been very successful with that anyway. So I sat on the bed and spoke aloud and told it I was just visiting with permission from the owners. I promised to clean up everything before I left. For some reason, I had the feeling that my travel clutter was making it upset, and in return, please, it would not scare me by materializing unexpectedly. After the evening, the place just felt empty. I didn't see the shadows anymore, and had the feeling that whoever it was had vacated or was just trying to stay out of the way. I guess we reached some sort of compromise. I told my husband that I thought there was a ghost in the apartment, and while he scoffed and told me I was crazy, I noticed he spent the remaining 3 nights at his mother's and sent our son back with me. No one has died in that apartment that I know of, but it's in a large building full of retirees, and I'm not sure many residents have passed on over the 30-year life of the building. Maybe someone was just wandering around. I will never know. Hi. I've sent info before, but I'm using a friend's computer today since the battery in my car is dead. Nothing to do with ghosts, I don't think. Anyway, having read about people seeing black figures, I thought I would add my 2 cents. The first time, I was 16, living with my grandparents in LA, who were out of town at the time. I wasn't drinking, just alone, when I left my bedroom and crossed the hall into the kitchen. That's when a figure stepped out in front of me. It was the strangest figure I'd ever seen. He appeared as a hairy ghost of some sort. His arms, face, and legs were completely covered in fur, but he still looked humanoid. It's a little difficult to explain, but it kind of looked like that famous Bigfoot photo in footage from 1967, except the presence was still a dark silhouette. Not dark enough that you couldn't see the fur, but still dark. It was creepy. I got a baseball bat and turned on all the lights in the house and even called a friend. Nothing else. Then, just less than 2 years ago, I'd since moved to Corrales, New Mexico. I was living with another woman. I got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. As I came out, through the door, there was another shadow being right in front of me.
I saw its head and shoulders, and it was taller than me. I put my hands up as if to gesture, excuse me, or not, to run it over. Since then, here in Corrales, I felt things in the corners, running around the room, and such. I bought my own house in July 1999, and my dog barked incredibly at one particular corner. My roommate at the time immediately burned sage, and he stopped. What are these things? I've not seen anything in my place, and the dogs haven't acted weird since. Any ideas? Someone did say that I might have been dimension jumping. Have you heard of this? Let me start off by saying, I've never met my real father. He died when I was a baby. Anyhow, I've always known about my deceased father. His name was Jerry. Now, no one in my family talks about my deceased dad, and we don't know anyone by the name of Jerry. One day, when I was between the ages of 8 to 9, my cousin and my mother and myself were downstairs, and we were in the basement singing. The phone began to ring, and even though we had a phone in the basement, I went upstairs, one flight, to our library to answer the phone, so as to not disturb my mother's song. When I answered the phone, I noticed immediately the static on the line, and I knew it wasn't our phone, so I asked the caller to speak louder. Now, from here on out, it gets weirder. The caller asked to speak to REC, my mom's nickname. I then asked who was calling, and the caller replied Jerry. I immediately knew my mother knew of no other Jerry, so I repeated the name, and the caller acknowledged that that was his name. I tell him to hold on. I run down the stairs to where my mother and cousin were, and tell my mother to pick up the phone, that she had a phone call, and that the caller's name was Jerry. My cousin looked up shocked, as did my mother, and simultaneously said Jerry. This is all happening within a minute or so. So my mother picks up the phone and answers the call, only there is no one on the line now. I run back upstairs to the library to hang up the phone, and I go back to the basement, and both my mother and my cousin are trying to figure out if I got the name right. I assure them I did, and then I tell them about the connection and the static. We all just kind of dismissed the call, only later when I started thinking about it, did I realize that my father never knew me and died very tragically when he was struck by a car. I think he wanted to hear my voice and hear my mother's voice. What I didn't tell my mother or my cousin is that the caller addressed me by my name. I never told the caller my name, but he knew my name. Tamaya. My ex-boyfriend lived in a very old part of town, in a house that was built in the 1800s. At one time, the home had been a stately and elegant one, with a long and gracefully curving stair as the focal point upon the entrance into the foyer. Through time, and with the coming of rough economic periods, the home grew into disrepair and was eventually sectioned off into a two-family home. One side housed a family of bikers, whose moonshine sent many a folk into orbit. We didn't have any moonshine the night this happened, and then the other lived my boyfriend and his roommate. One night, myself, my boyfriend Nick, Nick's friend Dave, and my friend Stacy, who was dating Dave at the time, were at the house. We were descending the grand staircase I mentioned earlier, on our way out to enjoy our Saturday night. All was dark, except for the soft lighting coming from the kitchen, which was illuminating the front doorway. On the front door, we saw the unmistakable silhouette of a woman in a long old-fashioned hoop skirt, like women wore in the 1800s. She scared the wits out of me and Stacy, and we both refused to go any further down the stairs until the rest of the lights were put on. Chickens, aren't we? Although Nick and Dave were in a position to see the woman's shadow, for some strange reason, they were unable to see her. Maybe she only liked women, but I know this for a fact. The next moment we actually saw the woman. It looked as if we saw her with her eyes gouged out, and she was running towards us, flying down the hallway. It was actually pretty creepy, but it happened in the corner of my eye, so I don't know if I was hallucinating or I actually saw her full steam ahead, but it definitely creeped me out. Another moment. My friend Stacy was upstairs, and the door was completely wide open, the bathroom door that is, and she saw that same woman in Victorian-era clothes just laying in the bathtub with, again, her eyes gouged out. I honestly don't understand what happened to this woman. At first I thought it was pretty innocuous, but now I understand. She must have been murdered. There's no other explanation I had than that. Thanks for reading, and I hope you enjoyed the story. I've always been hesitant to talk about this story, but what I tell you is true. In 1992, when I was separated from my wife for the first time, I was living at Old Farm in an apartment. One Saturday night, when my kids were off to their grandmother's and my girlfriend, who was a teacher, had an event to attend, I found myself in my apartment, all alone. I rented a couple of movies, ordered a Pizza Hut, went on over to the whirlpool for a while, and sat down to enjoy a peaceful night, alone at last. I was really looking forward to a night by myself. When I was reading in bed, I noticed a black silhouetted figure standing in my bedroom door. The figure appeared to have a cloak drawn over its head. I couldn't recognize any features, nor was there any attempt to verbally communicate. I was wide awake, and I was terrified. My heart was racing, and I kept pulling the covers over my head. It seemed like every second was one of terror. The figure stood in my doorway, well into the morning hours, and I knew my eyes were as big as they could get. When the silhouette disappeared, I was covered with sweat. My hair was raining wet. I rushed out to the front room because I really couldn't believe it had left me. No, the only thing I had to drink was a Diet Coke with popcorn. I'm not a big drinker. After the ordeal, I quickly showered and raced off to go hiking. I can honestly tell you that no communication with the figure was made. When I would ask who you are, there was no response. This went on all night until, by the grace of God, it went away. This event has always affected my life. I know of another person who had a similar experience like mine. Can you tell me what was standing in my door, why there was no communication, and why me? Have you ever had any stories like this reported to you? Until now, the only person I ever told this story to was a good friend who is a Catholic priest. It still scares me to tell this story. Why was there no attempt to communicate? And yes, when I checked my doors, they were all bolted and locked. My father loved the state of Maine. Not enough, however, to give up his cush job in Boston to live on the going wage of a Downeaster. So every summer, from the mid-50s until I reached high school, we would vacation on the scenic Maine coast. Very seldom will we stay in the same place twice. Usually, it was some remote cottage located on the outskirts of some tiny coastal town. A 2-week ordeal was in store for me, with no TV or friends to speak of. To keep me sane, my mother would buy me comic books and play board games with me, long into the night. We've been at this cottage now for about 10 days, and I was counting the hours until we would leave. It was a chilly August night, and dear old Dad had a few too many and drifted off to bed. Our terrier, Joe, was snoozing on the carpet in front of the fireplace, and through the big picture window, the surf was something out of a South Pacific movie. The waves were gently breaking on the rocky shore, not 20 yards from the cottage. The only sound was the reverie coming from a cruise ship that was passing off the point. In summary, the night was calm. Suddenly, Joe jumped to his feet with his hackles up and growled at the door. I yelled at the dog to be quiet as he interrupted me over a card game. In an instant, the front door blew open, and with a bang, it hit the interior wall. Just then, a ghostly presence entered through the doorway. He looked as if he was from the colonial era, had a musket in his hand, and seemed as though only half his face was visible, even though the figure itself had a blur to it. This lasted a few seconds, then the figure disappeared, like a fog that evaporated. Joe cowered, and my mother's hair moved, like it had been ruffled by some invisible breeze. The playing cards scattered about, and before we could take a breath, the door slammed shut, and Joe went back to his sleeping position. We decided not to tell the old man, as he wouldn't believe it anyway. A few days later, we were filling up the old Plymouth for the return trip to Boston, and my father started gabbing with the local about his vacation. With the windows of the car down, we heard every word. "So where did you stay?" the man asked, with the Maine dialect. "Oh, down on the point at the Jensen cottage," my old man answered. "Folks around here know that place well," the man said flatly. They referred to it as the front door. My name is John. I'm 41 years of age and currently live in the city of Lincoln, England. During my life to date, I've seen several ghosts, and whilst I still find them surprising and of course fascinating, I'm no longer afraid of whatever they are or appear to be. I saw my first ghost at around the age of 8 whilst having in my childhood home, a large Victorian house on the edge of Manchester, England. The ghost was one of a young boy of a similar age to mine at the time. He was leaning over the banister rail of the stairway landing outside my bedroom as I was making my way up to bed. The shock and surprise of seeing him sent me flying downstairs into the front room of my house. Needless to say, that none of my family appeared to believe what I told them I had seen. Although over the years, I've experienced strong sensations of ghostly presences, my next positive encounter was not until I was 22, whilst living and working in the city of Newcastle. I'd obtained the keys to a vacant industrial building, which my firm was taking over. My job was to assess the work involved in converting the building for its future use. I'd locked myself in the building and was therefore sure that no other person was on the premises, and was proceeding up some steep and narrow stairs when I felt a hand touch me on the top of my head and give my hair a friendly ruffle, rather like an affectionate parent may give their child. I immediately turned around, only to find the stairway completely empty. Surprised, but not afraid this time, I continued my inspection of the building. We moved into the premises, and although I had my office at the top of the stairs where I had my encounter, and worked there often late into the night, I never saw, heard, or felt anything unusual there again. My next encounter took place right here in Lincoln, about 3 years ago. Walking our dog out late one night, I noticed the cyclist approaching me along a side street. I thought the cyclist appeared a little unusual, insofar as he was riding an old-style, sit-em-up-and-beg cycle. His hair looked rather old-fashioned too, and most curiously of all, he appeared to be wearing an old-style Royal Air Force uniform. I could see the streetlight reflecting off the silver buttons on his uniform tunic, and from the chrome handlebars of his cycle. He got to within about 30 yards of me, when for some reason, I glanced down for a second. When I looked up again, he had completely disappeared from the street, and there was no way in which he could have left the street in the vicinity of where I last saw him. I wonder whether his appearance was, in some way, connected to the fact that there used to be an open-air swimming pool adjacent to where I saw him. This pool is very popular with air crews during World War II, and I can only assume he may have been on his way for a midnight swim. My most recent encounter was very brief, occurring during the first time I visited my mother's cottage in North Wales. Built around 200 years ago, the back room opens directly out into the rear garden, with the narrow stairs descending into the back room right beside the back door to the building. Whilst coming down the stairs, I saw an elderly woman walk through the back door and disappear. She was aged about 80, approximately 5 foot tall, wearing a gray dress with long sleeves, a white apron, and her straight gray hair was tied up in a sort of bun, which in turn was covered by a small handkerchief on the top of her head. She was followed immediately by a young girl, aged about 10 or 12, dressed in a long light, colored smock. Her hair was very long, blonde and straight, falling down her back. She also disappeared straight away. I've no idea what ghosts are or why they appear. I do not see them as threatening. In fact, on more than one occasion, a curious sensation of contentment seems to fill the air after they have gone. I've noticed that my mind is not thinking about anything in particular at the times I've come across them. Thanks for reading. I grew up in Western New York and knew the local legends of ghosts. The Rochester Durant White Lady, for example. I never really put much faith in them. I never had an experience until I left New York. In October of '99, I was transferred to Elmira, Ohio. After a few weeks, I was asked to work in Sandusky. I accepted the promotion, but having just settled into a new apartment, I decided to commute rather than move again. Halfway between Elmira and Sandusky, there was a rest stop on I-90, Route 2, just outside Vermilion. I would stop sometimes on the way home for a bathroom break, or rest a bit. It's a funny design. You drive around and park in back of the building, between the building, and wooden walking trails. I usually got off work after about 11 p.m., but it was usually pretty busy, so I never gave much thought to stopping there late at night. One night, in March of this year, I'd stopped for a bathroom break. I noticed that there was only a few cars in the lot. It was a warm spring night. I wondered why more people weren't out. As I returned to my car, I had this urge to walk into the wooded area, a stupid thing to do, as it would be easy for a human assailant to hide on the trails. I walked in about 10 feet, and the path split to the left and straight ahead. I walked a little further straight ahead and felt something in there with me. I turned and started to walk out when I heard a noise, kind of like a lumbering sound. Feeling foolish and thinking there was probably an animal, like a hedgehog or deer, walking through the woods, I looked back and saw a pair of yellow eyes on the path quite a whiles back. I knew it could not be an animal, as only the parking area was lighted. The only light in the woods came from the ambient light and the moon. I quickly closed the distance between myself and the parking area, keys in hand. To my relief, nothing pursued me, and the eyes were gone, or at least, I couldn't see them anymore. I went straight home. The next day, I felt rather silly. Thinking about the matter during the day, none of it seemed like it should have scared me. I rationalized the whole thing. That night, I stopped for a bathroom break. Feeling brave, I decided to once again check out the woods and dispel my fear once and for all. This time, I walked out only halfway to the fork, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I was not afraid in the usual sense, rapid heartbeat, sweating, etc. I just had this feeling of not being able to walk any deeper into the woods. It was like the air got heavier the further I walked. As I walked out of the woods, the feeling went away, just as it had come. I decided to come back on my day off and investigate during the day. I'd never been in the day, and I didn't know where the trails led or what was in the woods that attracted people to them. I returned a few days later with my jogging shoes, ready to explore. The trails wrapped around to each other and only totaled a mile loop. There was a ledge, a cliff area, but it was fenced off, and there was no way to get down, but I could see a stream in the distance. I didn't feel anything strange at all. Nonetheless, I made it a point not to stop there after dark. A few months later, I was transferred to Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which leads me to my next story. But we are still looking into it, and it's AM now, so I need some sleep. I don't usually share this with anyone, since most people would consider me crazy for believing in this stuff, my husband and father included. When I was about 2 years old, back in 1973, I have very vivid memories about my childhood, and my mother confirms my memories. We rented an old house, about 100 years old. It was there when in Phoenix, Arizona. It was not much, but a lot of farmland. There was a smaller house next to it that used to be the old barn. It's still there today, but surrounded by huge mansions. Anyway, things were peaceful there until our next door neighbor hung himself in the kitchen and my father found him. I never knew about it. But about 3 months after, things began to happen. My mother was having an argument with my father one morning before getting out of bed. She got really mad and got up and went to the kitchen. She saw a man sitting at the table with his head in his hands on the table so that she couldn't see his face. She turned around and went back to bed, not saying a word to my dad. Later, I began to see a hand floating in my room and would hear it talk to me. I called it, and this is kind of weird, bugs, but now I think it could have been about avid bugs or something about that. As a child that young, it was difficult to express myself with words yet. I didn't have the word for ghost and would be spanked by my father for crying at night when this thing would appear and talk to me. One time, I was sitting on the potty with my mom there to supervise. I couldn't get off the toilet, like something was holding me down. My mother was pulling me by the arms to try to get me off, but couldn't. Finally, it let go. Sometimes, the door was slammed shut and locked with me on the other side, and I couldn't get out. Only the lock on the other door didn't work anymore. No matter how hard my mother would pull, the door would not open. Then all of a sudden, it would feel as if nothing happened. At night, you could hear scratching noises under the wood floor in the master bedroom. Dad said it was just animals. He crawled under the house but didn't find anything. He never believes in this stuff. At night, when I would go to bed, always fussed about not wanting to go because I was scared. Before falling asleep, I felt something was trying to pull me through the wall. Sometimes, I felt like I was floating, like in another dimension or something. My mother finally had enough and made my dad find a new house to buy. We moved, and nothing quite as dramatic as that ever happened to me again. The new house had its little incidents, but that's another story. My parents are still alive in the house, and they bought it 27 years ago. First of all, let me explain. I'm from England. I'm a 26-year-old male living in Cambridge. I was born in Yorkshire, North England. Just up the road from where I lived was a place called Oakwell Hall, located in an area called Berkenshaw. Oakwell Hall is a fairly small house compared to some in the UK, but it certainly has local character. Many a day away from school would be spent wandering around the grounds. Local legend has it that the hall was once inhabited by a great local family named the Bats, hence the local town of Batley, and that one of the sons of the family, a womanizer and gambler of no small repute, found himself in a duel fought on the local moors. The servants all knew of this, and so were relieved. The sounds of his horse were heard, re-entering the stables. They were even more relieved when the son was seen walking through the hall, up the stairs, and to his bedchamber. They then made a rather spooky discovery when they noticed a bloody footprint on the staircase. Thinking their master was injured in a duel, they entered his chambers to see if they could help him. He was not there. The bed had not been disturbed. There was no horse in the stable. News was later conveyed that the son had died in the duel, and every Christmas Eve, the same bloody footprint can be seen on the staircase. This is not what I saw. I was 8 years old, and it was the school holidays. Two friends, Stephen and Stuart and myself, were walking through the garden when Stuart noticed one of the windows was blacked out. We noticed it as the sun was behind the house and so should have been shining pretty much through the hall and out the other side. Thinking that there may be something going on, there are occasionally demonstrations in the hall. We entered the building and up the stairs. As we got to the top of the stairs, Stephen remarked he felt a bit funny, and I suddenly felt cold. The next thing we saw was a black blob about a half a meter off the floor and about 1.5 meters tall float out of one door and into another. Stuart asked if anyone else had seen it, and we all said we had. Stuart then started to walk down the corridor very slowly, while Stephen and I stayed at the top of the stairs and were quite scared. Stuart looked around the corner and then ran back to us. We were so scared at this point that we just ran out and down the drive to the gate. Stuart told me later that he saw a figure about 6 foot tall that seemed to be made of shadows. He was dressed in a long coat and wore what looked like a top hat. He seemed to be looking for something, and then it became aware of him. He told me much later, about 10 years later, that it looked over its shoulder at him, and rather than a pair of eyes, it had a single red slit that seemed to pulse. I've been back to the hall since, and seen nothing out of the ordinary. However, I felt very uneasy about certain rooms. Oh well, there you go. I don't know if this qualifies as having a haunting or possession, or if I'm just crazy. I've read several stories on your site, which is great by the way, and haven't come across anything similar to one of my experiences, which I'll tell below. My father is suffering from advanced rheumatoid arthritis, along with hepatitis C. Not a good combination. Anyway, I've been living with the pain of knowing he would be sick and in pain for the rest of his life since I was 16. I'm now 22, and watching him suffer and struggle with his diseases. Because of this, I've become increasingly interested in whether or not there is another phase of existence after we leave this world. I've been asking, both mentally and out loud, for some type of proof of this, mostly for my own comfort. Anyway, I've recently been hearing noises that sound like a lot of people talking at once in my house when I'm home alone. It doesn't bother me or scare me, and it's so faint that it could be my imagination. Along with this, I've heard walking on my ceiling. My rooms are in the finished basement, and thinking my fiance was home, went upstairs to greet him, only to find myself still alone in this very house. Since I've been asking for proof, I wonder if it's only my imagination, but this next part was scary. I heard the voices. Sounds like a crowd of people all talking at once, but this time, I wasn't hearing them externally, with my ears, but originating from inside my head. I had this weird feeling that they were all talking directly to me, rather than just overhearing things like the other occasions. Anyway, the voices in my head just kept getting louder and louder, and all of a sudden, I was laughing uncontrollably for no reason. Probably doesn't sound too scary to you, but the whole time I was laughing, about 5 minutes, I was having thoughts like, why am I laughing? Why can't I stop laughing? There's nothing funny about this, and such. I was scared and physically willed myself to stop laughing, which didn't work. The voices started fading after about 5 minutes, and my laughing reduced to giggles, and then to shocked silence. I've never told anyone about these things. I even think I sound crazy. And no, I was not on any mind-altering substances at the time this happened. Has the voices, laughing thing happened to anyone else out there? Or am I just crazy? If this has happened to someone out there, please email me. Okay, I know there are skeptics out there, but my grandmother, my mom, and I are very in tune with their spirits for some reason. I'll start with my grandparents' babysitting ghost. We call him that because only kids could see him if all adults were out of the house. To explain the house a bit, the hallway is L-shaped. There's a bathroom to your immediate right, then 2 bedrooms, bedrooms 1 and 2, on your left. When you turn the corner, there's a bedroom, number 3 on your left, another bathroom on your right, and the last bedroom, number 4, at the end of the hall. My mom's dad was at work, and her mom and all my mom's brothers and sisters were outside, talking to friends and such. My mom was just sitting and watching TV. As my mom was watching TV, she saw something moving out of the corner of her eye and looked down the hallway from the living room. There was a very tiny old man sitting in a rocking chair, reading a book and looking up at her from time to time. She said he just smiled at her and kept rocking and reading. When the adults came back into the house, he disappeared. 2 of my cousins have seen him also. The one thing that totally freaked us out was after my mom and I moved in with my grandparents. My Uncle Kay had died in the first bedroom about a year before. He was really into drinking and drugs, so one night his heart, liver, and kidneys just failed on him. He was the practical joker of the family. Anyhow, My mom and I came home one night. My grandparents were out. We both had to use the bathroom really bad, so my mom ran to the first one, and I went to the second one at the end of the hallway. All of a sudden, I heard my mom yell, "Hey!" I was about to open the door to ask why she was yelling, when I saw a hand open the bathroom door. I hurried up and finished my business and ran to my mom and asked her what happened. Why did she open the door to the bathroom and not tell me what she needed? Then I realized she was still in the bathroom. She said she saw a hand opening her bathroom door. I told her I saw the same thing. We're the only people in this house, and this happened on the opposite ends of the house. She just looked up at the ceiling and said, "Kay, stop scaring us. We don't want to play with you right now. Your jokes aren't funny." We heard the most evil laugh we could imagine. At that point, we looked at each other and ran out of the house. When we came back, my grandparents were home, and we sat my grandma down and told her what happened. She had to have the house blessed 3 times before the spirits went away. I was visiting some relatives in Denton, Texas, in early July of this year when this strange event took place. My relatives live in a trailer park, and some of the trailers are sitting close together. One late night, when I was there, my nephew left his cigarettes in his car, so he went out to get them. I went with him. As we were walking to his car, we noticed that next door, there was someone rummaging around in a trash can that was in the back of the neighbor's truck. We thought nothing of it, thinking it was just one of the neighbors looking for something they threw away. As it was dark near where the vehicles were parked, we couldn't make out who it was. Well, my nephew got his cigarettes out of his car, and we were walking to the front of his trailer, where there is a bench you can sit on. We were walking towards it, when we noticed whoever it was that was walking through the garbage can was now walking up to the next door neighbor's porch, which was a good 20-30 feet from us. For whatever reason, just the sight of the person made both of us freeze, while this figure just stood at the foot of the next door neighbor's porch steps with its back to us. It was almost as if this figure knew we were looking at it, but it wasn't even facing towards us. It just stood there, and we felt that somehow it was looking at us. Somehow. In the light of the porch lights, we could make out the details of this figure. The figure was of a small boy, but what was weird was that his head was shaven on both sides of his head, and in the middle was a blonde mohawk type haircut, except it wasn't the short type, but more of the longer hairstyle mohawk. This kid had 80s style clothes on. The short, multicolored and unbuttoned, light blue shorts and white tennis shoes. This kid just stood there for a few moments and began ascending the next door neighbor's steps in a stiff, awkward way. Its arms were close to its sides, and as it went up the steps, it just continued staring straight ahead, not once looking down or in any other direction. Then, the view of the kid was obstructed by the neighbor's porch, so we could no longer see him. The weird thing is, we never heard the next door neighbor's front door open or anything that would indicate this person went in. My nephew and I, very unnerved and chilled, ran into his parents' trailer. We sat in his living room for a while, trying to rationalize what we had seen. He told me that the neighbors had 2 girls, but looked nothing like what we had seen. We asked my nephew's mother, my sister, if she knew if the neighbors had some relatives over, and if so, if they had a boy that looked like what we described. She said, not that she knew of. Well, the next day, we go over to the neighbor's trailer and ask them if they had anyone over that looked like what we saw, They said no. We've had no visitors in 2 weeks. And no, we have no boys or children, like what you described. My nephew and I then noticed there were 2 girls in the living room. We confirmed that that was the only children they had. So, who or what could have been? Where did it go? We didn't hear it go in the neighbor's home that night, so maybe it was just a strange neighborhood kid and went through their backyard to where they were going. Well, that would have been very difficult, since the neighbors have one of those extremely high wooden fences with no doors on it in their backyard. Besides, why would it go through the trouble of going up into their porch when they could have gone around? It's an old trailer park, and there's no telling how many people have lived and died in a lot of those trailers. I'm just glad I don't live there. Something and everything about this is strange, and what we saw that night, I know in my heart that it was not normal, but paranormal. I'm just glad the figure never turned around to look at us. I don't know what would have happened then. I'd hate to find out. My name is Paul, and I live in Canada, in the province of Nova Scotia, in a small city called Sydney. This small city was at one time an industrial center with coal mines and a large steel plant that employed thousands. This area's past employment promises has drawn in many foreigners to settle here, and we have a rich history of superstitions and beliefs. I should say that I'm not exactly a believer in ghosts, although I have an open mind to the idea that there may be something to it at all. Anyway, on with my story. I think I was 17 or 18 when this happened, which was around 1987. I was working for my local McDonald's restaurant and was working until 2 a.m. It was shortly after midnight when I took a break and called my girlfriend to say goodnight. As we talked, she stopped to see if someone had come down the stairs from the second level of her parents' home because she thought she had heard footsteps. She checked the stairs twice, but nobody was there. The conversation turned to the fact that at times, she would hear sounds in the house as though someone was walking the stairs. Our topic then returned to the normal teenage babble until she happened to look into the adjacent room. She thought she saw someone sitting at the end of the sofa. She put the phone down momentarily while she turned on the light in the darkened room. It was only a sweater and a jacket laid over the backrest of the sofa, so we resumed our conversation once again. I can tell you that she had no thoughts of anything paranormal. She was thinking that maybe someone else was home other than her sleeping parents, as she had a number of older brothers still living at home. I can remember that as we talked, she stopped dead in mid-sentence and started to weep. I was wondering what was wrong, thinking that I had said something to upset her. When I got her to speak, she told me that there was someone there, standing in the doorway of the room where she had just been. She sobbed that she was trying to sit very still in the hopes that this apparition would not see her and just go away. I tried to talk to her and settle her down, not quite sure if this was a joke or not. I think that the figure stood in this position for at least 5 minutes. Then, just when my terrified girlfriend calmed down a little, the figure moved into the hallway and assumed a sitting position, legs crossed. I again had to try and calm her down by talking to her and asking her to describe what she was seeing. The figure, she said, appeared to be a boy of about 8 or 10 years old. He was wearing a modern-looking winter jacket and a winter hat. She said that although the facial features were not plain, the eyes could be clearly seen and were blue. The hands and feet area of the figure faded out of sight. This boy sat on the floor, not 10 feet from her, and looked right at her. Another minute or two passed, and then my girlfriend started weeping again. I remember her whispering, "Oh, Paul, it's a girl." She told me that the figure had reached up and pulled a hat off its head, and long blonde hair flowed from under it. The figure sat and stared in my girlfriend's direction a few minutes more, and then appeared to stand up and go back into the room where it came and disappeared. My girlfriend stayed on the phone just long enough to be sure it was gone. Then she hung up with me and ran for her parents' bedroom. That was the end of the experience. It had lasted about 15 minutes. She asked her parents the next day if they could think of who this may have been. They had no ideas and probably didn't believe her. I wasn't quite sure if I believed her either, and I kept asking her if she was playing a joke on me. She insisted she saw what she saw, and she wasn't comfortable talking about it for fear that it may reappear. I'm now married to my girlfriend, and she still swears every word of this is true. She still doesn't like to talk about it. No one has ever seen a ghost in that house before, or since, that I'm aware of. My wife over the years has gotten spooked, and came running to me saying that she felt uneasy, and was afraid she was back, but she hasn't been. I don't know if you respond to these letters or not, but if you do, write me a note to tell me what you think. Thank you for reading.
I've always been interested in the supernatural, and am convinced that ghosts do exist. Unfortunately, I've never seen nor felt one. I am, however, overly curious and try on occasion to find one. I have a friend that often accompanies me, but sometimes she gets too afraid to press on. She can feel their presence and bows out. I think she can feel them. And if she perceives them as evil, well, she just quits. She has a gift that I can only wish I had. I, on the other hand, don't possess that gift, and as a result, am fearless. I suppose I ought to get on with my stories. Again, I've never seen a ghost, but listen to this. My curiosity in the supernatural goes years back. When I was younger, I attended a university in southern Illinois. I had a friend named Tanya, whose parents lived in a supposedly haunted house. They claimed that a ghost lived in the attic of their home. I don't remember the spirit's name at this time, but I do remember that they claimed that she liked to play with the hangers in the attic, and that they could hear her slamming doors and climbing to the stairs to the attic at night. There were other farther-fetched claims as well, but they said that whenever something strange happened, they would always have the association of the smell of lilacs. It was, apparently, the popular perfume of the time when this girl passed. No explanation was given as to the events of her passing. Anyway, I was invited to sleep in the attic of their home one night. I was apprehensive at first to be able to relax enough to sleep, but in time, I started to drift away. Just as sleep began to overtake me, I heard a very loud and unsettling rustling in front of my face. I instantaneously turned on a light right next to me. Nothing was there. The memory of that sound made it very difficult for me to concentrate on sleeping again. But after what seemed to be about 2 hours, I started to succumb to sleep again. As I drifted again came that sound, louder this time. I stayed calm for a few minutes to be sure this was actually happening. I stayed still, but pulled my eyes open to see if anything was there. There was no light. My eyes were wide open. I was fully awake, and the noise persisted. Again, I turned on the light, and there was nothing there. Once the light came on, the noise ceased instantly. This time, I decided to feign asleep. I turned out the light, closed my eyes, and regulated my breathing. I did everything like sleeping, without actually sleeping.
Eventually, I even got my heart to stop pounding. Hell, I was scared, but managed to seem oblivious. Once again, it started, and in an instant, I turned on the light yet again. There, in front of my eyes, was a mass, a ball of white moths, about the size of a softball. As soon as the light hit them, they flew straight into the shadows of the room. Not like moths fly. They flew straight course into the various shadows and disappeared. They disappeared into shadows, not holes or cracks. They weren't real. No moth could do what I'm trying to describe here. Once they disappeared, my fear was gone, and has been ever since. I'm no longer afraid of ghosts. I believe that if a spirit chooses to stick around, it is because it, or they, have something to tell you. I'm convinced that these moths were presented to me by Lily, a girl, and I believe that she showed them to me only because she wanted to be acknowledged, not feared. I think that if I were to return to this house, she'd show me the moths again. This time, I'd be much more appreciative and a lot less afraid. I'd see it as a welcome to an old friend than as a threat to a newcomer. I think she just needs someone to talk to. She must have been terribly lonely. Moth story number 2. About a year after that incident, I was still in college. I was on the 16th story of my dorm, cramming for finals. I happened to look out onto the ledge, outside the window, where sat a beautiful green wood moth. I knew it meant something, but at the time, not what. My roommate walked into the study area and informed me that I had a call from my mother. I went into my room and answered the phone by saying, "Is Gran dead?" My mom was speechless for a time. Then she said, "How did you know?" I didn't answer. You see, my Gran was 103 when she died. For years, she didn't know my name. She always just called me Janine's son. Well, on the day that her husband died at 98 years old, I took her for a long walk around her house. She hadn't been out in years. During that brief walk, I had found a feather in a greenwood moth's wing. I saved them as a token of that day. After that walk, she never called me Janine's son anymore. She called me that nice boy who took me for a walk about twice. Then, she just called me that nice boy. When I heard of her passing that day, I made arrangements to get to her funeral. I did, and upon viewing her casket, I placed the feather and the wing on her body. I feel that she's still around and still views me as the nice boy. Once again, I must reiterate that I've never seen a ghost. I promise you, though, that they are real, and I don't need to see to believe. Just as Grandma Chip, she's still there. Look for a moth. When you do, it'll be a greenwood moth. This is what I like to call motion pictures on the wall. The first time it happened was when I was about 6 years old. I had woken up in the middle of the night and crept into bed with my parents. I still couldn't sleep, and when I rolled over towards the wall, it appeared that someone was showing a movie on it. Hard to explain, but it was a dim, full-color, silent motion picture, like a living painting, of a man dressed like Henry VIII, talking to a woman being helped into a wide hoop frame that went under her dress. That was it. Then it ended. Totally harmless, but still, how the heck did it get there? I told my mom about it in the morning. I had tried to wake her up and Dad, but they were sound asleep. She said I was just hallucinating because I was so tired, but was still amazed at my description of the hoop skirt and undergarment, as I've never seen one before. Okay, fast forward 3 more years. My brother and I were staying with our folks at our grandparents' house. We kids begged to sleep in the dining room under the huge table so we could pretend it was a fort. Again, in the middle of the night, I awoke to find a huge silent motion picture on the wall. This time, I was able to wake my brother up, and together we watched it. He stood up and looked out the window to see if someone was doing it from the outside. No, nothing. No source of light or anything. In fact, the shadow of his head didn't even show on the wall. It completely disappeared for a second. But then, I heard a noise coming from the hallway in the house. A really frightening, disturbing wailing. It was the scariest sound that I have ever heard in my life, like someone being butchered to death. Then, into the dining room came a black shadow. We only saw this shadow for about 40 seconds before it ultimately dissipated. I swear to God, the shadow looked as if it was wearing a top hat, and it was running around before ultimately dissipating, like I said. I don't know how this happened, but even my friend saw this at the time, and we were in the dining room like I said, but there's nothing to explain this away. Maybe it was connected to the silent motion picture I saw on the wall. In fact, I can almost guarantee the motion picture on the wall was actually a family of ghosts. Actually, it was a family of ghosts that were shadow people. That's what I truly believe. Of course, I'm guessing that this family of shadow people must have been a part of a huge tragedy, because it's apparent that something caused the scream to happen. Whatever the case it was, it didn't matter now. It turned into something harmless and then became ruthlessly scary. I hope I never find out what exactly happened in the house. I'm not willing to face it. My second daughter was born on October 28th, 1986. She died of a sudden infant death syndrome 6 weeks later. She often lets us know she is still around by playing pranks and sometimes allows other family members to see her. When the movie Pocahontas came out, my oldest daughter loved it. We bought her a Pocahontas talking bank. If you haven't seen the type of bank I mean, it is one with Pocahontas and Grandmother Willow. If you drop a coin in it, Grandmother Willow starts talking. It has a button you can push for the same result. For about 3 months, this bank would start talking when no one was in the room with it. We kept the bank on a shelf in the bathroom above the sink. One morning, I was standing in front of the mirror shaving. The bank was 2 feet in front of me. But when the bank started talking, well, I don't often cut myself shaving, but this time, another time my wife had washed her favorite shirt. It was loose-fitting and lightweight, perfect for working in her garden. She washed it, and I know I took it from the washer and put it in the dryer. When we took the load of clothes out of the dryer, the shirt was nowhere to be found. 3 months later, we found it in a small cabinet in our bedroom. We only use the cabinet for storing small things and rarely open it. I can't remember what I was looking for, but I opened the cabinet and there was the shirt, neatly folded. There was another time when my wife bought me some material to make me a couple of shirts. She brought it home and folded it and put it away in her sewing trunk to work on later. A week later, she opened her sewing trunk to begin the work, and the material was gone. 6 months later, we had forgotten about the material, and my wife was going to sew another project. She opened her trunk, and there was the material, replaced once again by my second daughter. My youngest daughter, now 11 years old, often sees her sister either in the house or out in the yard. She sometimes talks to her, and I mean she carries on a conversation. My oldest daughter has also seen her. I've seen her once. She was standing by the living room in the entrance of the hallway. I was coming out of the kitchen, and saw her in my peripheral vision. When I looked up, she vanished. I can say that those on the other side do not stay children forever. My second daughter, who we lost when she was a baby, now appears to us as a lovely 16-year-old. Then again, perhaps a spirit can appear in any form. Perhaps my daughter appears the age she would, so we can recognize her. It may seem strange to some people that we live with a spirit as a normal part of the family, but that's exactly what she is, and we love her the same as our two children who are here in the flesh. Being of Cherokee and Iraqi descent, we do not fear spirits, but try to understand them. They are not here to harm, only to guide. My great-grandfather was a self-proclaimed ghost hunter. I've heard many stories growing up from my grandfather of his exploits in the field. Now, he wasn't the whole mystical crystals and holy water type. His theory on ghosts was one shared by many. They are here for something. Either a lost item from their past, or a deed left undone. The way he went about the hunt was fairly simple-minded. He would follow tales of haunted houses, graveyards, bridges, whatever, and research them as well as he could, and try to figure out what the ghost wanted, and give it to them. At the time in history when he was doing this, many people were offering rewards for someone to step in a haunted house for a night, so he would move in and spend however much time it took. Not all of the stories my grandfather told were successes, but one I remember vividly was, I will tell it to you now, and then I'll relate my own experience. Back in the 1800s, my great-grandfather was a ghost hunter. He mainly did it for the reward money offered to sleep in haunted houses at first, but a growing need to help soon took over. One such place was a farmhouse on the Oklahoma prairie, where a woman in white, I know, stereotypical ghost story, would be seen walking down the staircase and out onto the front porch. It was one of those old wraparound types that goes all the way around the house. Once on the front porch, she would pace the length of the front of the house a few times and then disappear. Other times the woman would be crying, but you could never pin down the sound. My great-grandfather moved into this house and lived there for about 2 months while trying to figure out what the ghost wanted. Many times he would be sleeping in the entryway of the house, at the foot of the stairs, trying to catch a glimpse of the lady. After about 3 weeks of research, by talking to all the people that lived nearby, we are talking about 1800s Oklahoma nearby, and I guess that would be within a 10-mile radius. He found an older couple who had known the original builders of the house, and every family that lived there since. They began relating the story of the house to him, as best they could. It seems that the first lady to live in the house had only 2 children, a boy and a girl, and when the girl was about 16, she fell in love with one of the local farmer's sons. After a few months, the marriage was arranged, and events were set into motion. They got married in the spring in the front room of the house. They built their own small house on some of the land, and lived there for a few years, until the girl's mother got ill. Then they moved in to stay and take care of her and the family. The brother had recently joined the army and was away. After a few months, the mother passed away, and the girl and her husband also became ill. The father was left to take care of them and soon became ill as well. They all died after about a year of fighting the illness and trying to keep the house and land cared for. After that, the boy, now serving in the army, came back to collect any belongings and dispense with the house. He sold the house to the local bank and left to live in Texas. About a year later, a young couple moved into the house and lived quite happily for about 3 years until they started seeing the lady walking down the stairs and along the porch. They soon moved away and let the loan default back to the bank. A few other families had lived in the house, but all moved out soon after, and the bank was stuck with his house. Finally, the owner of the bank decided to offer a reward for anyone to sleep in the house to prove it wasn't haunted. Well, empowered with this knowledge, my great-grandfather went back to the house and set watch for the ghost. After seeing her a few times, he noticed she seemed to be looking for something on the porch, so he got some digging equipment and began to dig under the porch. After about 2 weeks of digging, he found a small gold ring. Thinking that had to be what the ghost wanted, he placed it on the railing of the porch and waited that night to see what happened. Nothing happened for about another week. Then he was sitting on the porch, enjoying the good weather, when he caught sight of her walking down the stairs. Not daring to move, he watched as she walked the length of the porch until she came even with the ring. She turned and seemed to look at the ring for a long time, then just vanished. He spent another week in the house and never heard so much as a creak and never saw the woman again. A ring he put under the first step of the stairway, and as far as anyone knows, is still there. That is how my grandfather related that story to me, not in the scary ghost story boogity-boo way, just a plain and simple fact, a piece of family history. Now my story. I was about 18 and living with a friend of mine and his mother. We all lived in a small house. Some would call it a shotgun shack because you could shoot a shotgun through the front door and not hit anything but the back door. It was all one room, only separated by a small wall that ran about 3 feet from each outer wall. You could walk straight from the living room to the kitchen, going through the bedroom in a straight line. One night, I was sleeping on the floor in the living room when I was awakened in the middle of the night. I don't know if it was a sound that woke me or just a bad feeling, but when I woke up, I happened to be turned so that I looked straight into the bedroom. I saw what looked like sheer curtains lit by moonlight blowing outside beside the bed that my friend's mother was sleeping in. I had an eerie feeling, but being half asleep, didn't think anything of it and promptly fell back asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I remember what had happened and looked at the wall, expecting to see an open window. The problem was, there is no window on that wall, not anywhere in the house. All the windows are on the opposite wall, so it couldn't have been a curtain. Later that day, I asked my friend's mom about it, and she told me that it was her father, that he came to help her when she had a bad night. She had terrible arthritis. She said that she never saw him, but could feel his presence. I had many other strange experiences in the house. Rocking chairs that didn't need anyone sitting in them to rock, things disappearing and reappearing in strange places when no one was home. To say the least, I was glad when I got an opportunity to move out. This incident occurred about 20 years ago in Mishikawa, Indiana, when I was only 9. Our house was built in 1904, so it had the huge solid oak doors in trim. The living room was very long, with ceilings which are 12 feet high. I hope you got the idea of the architecture of this house. The basement was a full one, divided into 2 rooms, and this is where most of the presents seemed to be. I'll get to that later. Back to the house though. The master bedroom was downstairs, with its entrance being oak sliding doors. All of the fixtures were of the early 1900s also, so the living lights were hanging chandeliers, one at each end of the living room. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms, with a landing at the top with a banister guarding the stairs. The stairs were enclosed and curved, and this will be important in a minute. The house upstairs wasn't insulated well, so in the winter it was cold, and in the summer, hot. As a consequence, my 2 brothers and I slept on the pull-out couch downstairs. One night, my younger brother and I went upstairs to get ready for bed, and as we were going down the stairs, I looked back up, due to the feeling something was there, and I saw an apparition coming towards us. I screamed and told my brother to look up. He did, and saw the same, so we flew down the rest of the stairs and yelled at our parents to go look for the man. They did, and of course, nothing was there. Now, let me describe the ghost. He was not opaque, he was complete in his form, and he was dressed in Catholic priest clothes. I noticed this because we're not Catholic, but my friend next door was, and I visited her church just down the road. I thought this was very peculiar, but what I thought was even more peculiar was the fact he was holding a gun, and he pointed it directly at us, or so what I thought was a gun. Of course, my parents told us we were young and had very vivid imaginations, and it was nothing. Years later, however, my mother confessed that she knew the house was haunted, and also because when she was the only one home, she would hear something walking up the stairs and on the stairs. We always had German shepherds, and our dog would growl at the ceiling and would never go in the basement. Now, onto the basement. I knew there was a presence here in the back room where the water heater was, because it was much colder, and felt wrong. It felt evil and bad, and didn't want anyone there, because it felt you, and you just had to leave immediately. I want to say that the upstairs didn't have this feeling to it, even though this is where we saw the man. I'm not sure of the history of this house, and soon after this incident, we moved to Florida on my dad's company transfer. I just want to give my opinion on this. After researching different types of hauntings, I feel that this was a replay of some kind, and I was a witness to it. I do feel that there might have been more than one presence, because the evil in the basement was different than the other, and the one in the basement didn't want anyone there. He did other things to give us this feeling. Mostly, the noises were harmless and no bother to us, but it was the basement that we avoided for whatever reason. I would love to hear what you all think of this, and the type of haunting you feel it is. I used to spend a lot of nights driving around in my youth. I was young and reckless, and had no clear direction in life, so I'd often find myself aimlessly driving, late at night. I'd spent a majority of my adolescent years dependent on drugs, and unfortunately, almost succumbed to an overdose. I was harming others, but most importantly, I was on a path to self-destruction. The night before my overdose, I had a creepy paranormal experience that, fortunately for me and those around me, changed my entire life for the better. It was another one of those late night drives. I'd gotten into a verbal altercation with my parents. Words that weren't meant to be said were exchanged, and I ended up running away from home. I took the keys and headed out driving for hours until I ended up in an unfamiliar town. I was starting to get a little exhausted, was 6 hours away from home, and was running low on gas. What happened next will always be embedded into my subconscious for the rest of my life. I pulled up to a gas station in the middle of nowhere. Now, like I said, this area was completely isolated from the rest of the world. It had a last house on the left kind of feel. Until I ended up at the gas station. I'd driven past miles and miles of just cornfields and farmland. Woods all around, nobody in sight. I ended up walking to the gas station and bought myself a pack of cigarettes from the station attendant. He noticed I looked a little confused and asked if I was lost. I said yeah, I was. This was before GPS and cell phones, and I didn't have a map with me. He told me there was a bridge in the distance that was visible from the gas station less than a mile or so away, but said if I crossed it, I could pass another town nearby and find a highway that could take me back home. I thanked him, pumped my gas, and went driving towards the bridge. As I started to make my way through this road, and on my way through the bridge, rain started to pour down, and I could barely see through my windshield. It had rained so much that it almost obscured my vision, and there was no source of light anywhere along the dirt road I was traveling on, except for my headlights. A guy at the gas station told me the bridge was very close by, and even though I could see it in the distance before it started raining hard, it felt like it had been forever before I could see it. Just then, I finally came across the bridge, despite the downpour. This is the part that really startled me. I was driving across the bridge, absolutely nobody in sight, no other cars. It was late at night, 3 a.m., and nothing but trees and bushes scattered around the bridge. I kept driving across this long bridge, and that's when my headlights shined onto this small child who suddenly appeared within my field of vision. All I could remember was that his eyes were glowing, almost like an animal in the night. I was unable to stop in time, and I thought I had hit him. I immediately panicked, stopped the car in the pouring rain, got out to check to see if he was okay, and the kid was nowhere to be found. It confused the hell out of me, because again, what kid would be playing around in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, and in the pouring rain? I didn't even hear a thud, or any noise besides the sound of the rain falling down on my car at the moment of impact. I looked under the car. It was as if this child didn't even exist. I remember distinctly that the boy was wearing overalls and a hat. It looked like a completely real boy. There was no mistaking that this was a human. Now, I mentioned my recklessness and drug abuse because this incident caused me to turn my life completely around. I was so worried that I accidentally hit a child, and it may have ran off into the woods, that it made me swear to always be alert and never fight with my parents again. This happened when my brother was around 5 years old. It was around 2 a.m., and he went into my parents' room to get in bed with my mom. My mom's bed was right by one of the bathroom doors. The door on the other end of the bathroom led to where the back door was, and the stairs to the basement. He got in bed and was facing the bathroom. He got scared and woke up my mom and asked who the little girl in the bathroom was. He said he had never seen her before. He told my mom that she was just standing there, staring at him. My mom said the way he was talking, like there was really someone there, it really scared her. She said she just rolled over and shut her eyes. She was too scared to even look. I don't think a 5-year-old imagines things like that. While we were in the same house, my mom's cousin was hunting in the mountains and accidentally fell on his gun and killed himself. The family thinks he came back to say bye because it was such a sudden death. A few days after he died, when we were all in bed, a light in the hallway bathroom would click on and off. It was an older house, so the switch made a really loud click when he turned it on and off. My mom would be sitting on the couch late at night, with her back facing the hallway. You can sometimes feel when someone is behind you, and she said she heard me breathing hard and walking up the hallway. She called my name and turned around, and no one was there. At the same time, at her cousin's parents' and sister's house, similar things were happening. His old toys from when he was younger were stored in the basement of his parents' house. One night his electric train turned on. It was going around the track. No one knew this was happening to other family members until my mom called his parents and told them what was happening to her. The next day they went somewhere and tried to contact them. They all said they loved him and it was time for him to move on. They think he was trying to contact the family because he died suddenly. After they talked to him, everything stopped. The following happened back in July 1995. Me and a friend traveled around the UK by train. It was about 4 p.m. Then we checked in at a bed and breakfast in Manchester. All double room was occupied, so we got the 2 single rooms, which was located next to each other. We were quite tired after a long day trip by train, so we rest for a moment. Later we went out to eat something, had a beer in the hotel bar, and then headed up to the rooms for sleeping. The time was about 11 p.m. I closed the Vatican blind, turned off the light, and almost immediately fell asleep. The room was pitch dark. Then, after about 2 hours, I woke up and found the room bathed in light. The light almost blinded me. I had a strong emotion to walk towards the window, just like I was enforced to do so, and then I went up. I heard voices and music, like old folklore or something. The voices was only like a murmur, so I actually couldn't hear what it says. It was like being in a full-up restaurant or a pub or something. I was not actually scared, but it was an uneasy and confusing experience. Then, I reached the window and opened the Venetian blind. Everything turned to normal again, quiet and pitch dark. I went back to bed again, and to my surprise, I fell asleep after only about 10 minutes. The morning after, we met up and headed down the stairs for breakfast. Afraid of being regarded as a fool or jackass, I told him it was only a dream. Then, I almost dropped my coffee pot when he told me that the exact same thing happened to him. He has always been quite skeptical to the paranormal things, but I think this experience has changed his mind a bit. I would be very glad if you could give me your opinion. I have apprehension about what really happened that night. I know I was fully awakened, and it can't be my imagination, because the same thing happened to him. As I said in a previous mail, I'm not so good with English, so I hope you understand me. You may publish my story if you want, but you better circumscribe it before. Hi there, my name's Joe. My friend Colin probably wrote you recently about some recent activity. For the past I don't know how many years, I've been able to feel, and to an extent see ghosts. I can sense what they are feeling and what their intentions are. However, for about 3 years, my friend Colin started having sleeping problems. I already knew his house was haunted, but what was haunting it was the spirit of what I think is a 5-year-old child. For Christmas the year before, a friend of ours that lived in Thailand sent us all gifts. However, Colin was the one that received a house that you would leave tokens and gifts in to help ward off evil spirits. Over time, it stopped doing that. Trapped in the house was some kind of creature, like a demon. It was huge, dark, and very menacing. I still don't know how to use all of my abilities very well, but at the time, I sure as hell didn't, but I attempted this anyway. We attempted to destroy the house, and everything in it. It took 45 minutes just to get it to catch fire. During this 45 minutes, I was attempting to immobilize the creature inside the house. After 45 minutes, I was able to trap it, by pure luck. After I trapped it, I was able to see what was being stored in the house. It was a large field, fire everywhere, dead bodies on fire, blood everywhere. It reminded me of what hell would look like when described to you as a child. After that, I was drained. I couldn't do much of anything. I thought I lost all my abilities, but after 2 months they started coming back, very slowly. I knew this only because I was able to see the ghost in Colin's house again. While I was living in Korea, I encountered a few spirits, but they were by chance and left over from the war. That was when I knew my abilities were back to full, but I wanted to learn how to better use them, and I'm not having any luck. Well, to end the story on a bad note, last week my friend Jess asked about any ghost encounter any of us have had, so Colin and I talked about this one. So Jess got curious and wanted to see where it happened. Reluctantly, we took him there. Surprisingly enough, development has been going on in the area for the last 5 years, but at the spot where we destroyed the house, nothing is built. We went to the spot, and I was able to feel it out from residue from when we first destroyed it, but after a few minutes, it wasn't just that. The feeling I was getting became stronger until it made me sick. I almost passed out, and I doubled over dry heaving. It turns out it was still trapped there until that night. Somehow, it got loose. I don't know how or why, but now I have to get rid of it for good, and I don't know how. In 1989, I moved into a government apartment in a small town containing 7 units. The last apartment was occupied by a single mom with a small child and her boyfriend. The previous year, they, man and woman, were murdered and shot to death in their bed, in their first bedroom by the woman's estranged ex. No one wanted to move into the apartment because of the history surrounding the apartment. I was a young mother and had 2 children and needed a place to live, and thought nothing of this. In time, I was told of the strange happenings of the place and chalked it up to superstition or small-minded people with too much time on their hands. Things were pretty quiet for me and my little ones for the first few months. Then small things started to occur. Light over the sink area in my kitchen would mysteriously come on in the middle of the night. Being the only adult in the house, and the only person who would actually reach the switch, this had me worried that I had an electrical short or something, and promptly had it checked out. Nothing. Perfectly normal. Kitchen cabinet doors would be halfway open in the mornings when I awoke. I scolded my oldest daughter, 7 years at the time, for climbing the counters and getting snacks out, and she told me that she was asleep and she didn't do it. My youngest daughter, 2 years old at the time, was starting to make a habit of getting up in the middle of the night and getting into bed with me. Very unusual for her. She's a hard sleeper. At one point, I was having trouble sleeping, so much so, to the point I went to a doctor and got sleeping medication, all to no avail. I always woke up at 3 a.m. and had a difficult time getting back to sleep. Nothing worked until I rearranged my bedroom furniture and moved my bed from one end of the room to the other. Once, while my oldest daughter was visiting her grandmother overnight, myself and my youngest daughter decided to take a bubble bath together in the late evening. While we were in the tub, I heard jingle bells rattling around in the cup on a shelf not 5 feet from me. All of my windows were closed, and no one else was in the house. Couldn't explain it at the time. After 3 years, I chose to move in with a man to a better neighborhood. My landlord chose that time to tell me the complete history of my apartment. He showed me the newspaper articles on what happened, and after reading all of them, I understood all. The ex climbed through the bathroom window and shot them both dead at 3 a.m. and took the child, which was sleeping between the two. Her bed was in the exact position as I had my bed when I couldn't sleep. The mom was a stay-at-home mom and was always in the kitchen fixing stuff for her little child, making homemade cookies, snacks, and such. She always left the kitchen sink light on for her boyfriend when he came in late at night. My daughter always getting into my bed late at night was quickly understood by me. The other bedroom was never used by the child. She always slept with her mother and the boyfriend. No other tenants have reported any activity in this unit. Of course, they didn't have a smaller female children either. Time will tell if this ghost will ever find peace or her final rest. Before moving out, the last night there, I made my peace with her and told her I understood why she did the things she did. I understand she wasn't trying to scare me or my little girls, and I wished her peace. One afternoon of 1995 or 96, I was dusting our bedroom, the master bedroom, in our apartment. Right beside our bedroom was a small hallway leading up to the bathroom into the other bedroom. I remember being in a very good mood. I'd been doing a few changes in the decoration of the bedroom and was now dusting. I was happy with the results, and as I was dusting, I was talking about the changes with my husband, or what I thought was my husband, standing in the hallway. All smiling and happy, I started to tell him, or what I thought was him, "Hey Frankie, look at what I've just done. Isn't that nice?" I advanced in the hallway to bring him in the bedroom, and as I neared him, he disappeared. I nearly jumped. Now, as I was dusting, I happened to turn my head towards the hallway, which was on my right, and there stood a man who very much looked like my husband and who was dressed in modern clothes, a short and a t-shirt. When I saw him, I was sure he was my husband. That is when I started talking to him, and as I was cheerily and happily explaining the changes to him, he had this most beautiful smile of encouragement. He seemed to be happy for me. What a surprise when I realized that I had been speaking to someone or something else than my husband, and when I saw it, it disappeared. It is when this being disappeared that I realized that my husband was lying on the couch and watching TV. He was very surprised when I told him what happened. I live in Australia, and I've been seeing spirits ever since I was about 2 years old. My first experience was just after my grandmother's death. I was visiting her grave for the first time, and then all of a sudden, I started hearing voices. They were telling me to leave, that it was too dangerous for them and me if I stayed, that I had to run and never turn around. It is weird that I remember it, although my memory is not as clear as my mother's, but I remember most of the details. I know that this is pretty hard to believe, but I give you my word it is true. Although I think about it now and realize that I wasn't scared, at the time I knew that I had to leave, so I told my mom and dad, and we left. My dad didn't believe me, but my mom did. Since then, I've had many experiences with spirits, all of which have been good, except for one. This happened when I was 15. I'd been roped into a swimming carnival, and I can't swim too good, so I was practicing in my pool. The pool is down the very back, and you can't see the house from the pool, as it is behind a shed. I've often seen spirits down the back, but it has never worried me. It was getting late, and I've been swimming for a while, so stopped for a break. Whilst I was standing in the middle of the pool, I seen a baby sitting on the fence that surrounds the pool. I tried to look away, but I was in a trance. I finally stopped looking at it, but it was good, as I was suddenly dragged under the water. I struggled for about 2 minutes before it would let go. When it finally did, I ran inside. I told my mom, and she never believed me, but I've never been down there on my own ever since. My name is Evan, and my friend's name is Scott. We're making a trip to North Carolina for a concert in August of 1996. After the concert, we drove for a long while, finally making it to South Carolina, and were in need of a place to camp, as it was getting pretty late. We found the Kings Mountain State Park entrance, but being almost 2 a.m., the gates was locked. We both got out of the VW camper to see if we could get the gate open. The road was completely deserted, and being at the entrance, we were not even close to any campsites. With the headlights of the camper as our only source of light, a woman appeared out of nowhere. She had dark hair, thin white dress, and was barefoot. She asked us if we were with the wedding party, and we replied that we were not. As quickly as she appeared, she was gone. Scott and I thought it was kind of weird, no evidence of another car on the road, and the fact that she was barefoot in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m. in the morning. Entertaining the thought that we may have had an encounter with a ghost, we forgot about it. Recently, I was reminded of the incident and thought I'd surf the web to see if there was documentation of some similar experience when I found your site. I was blown away when I found an entry for Kings Mountain State Park and the woman in the white dress. The entry said that she was murdered by the clan for marrying a black man. I wonder if they were married right before the murder, and that's why she asked us if we were the wedding party. In 1977, in the afternoon, when I was 11 years old, me and a couple friends were crayfishing at Happy Hollow Park in San Jose, California. We were fishing on the other side of the creek, away from the park. As we were walking through the heavy bush, we seen a lady with long black hair and wearing a red short dress and blouse, with a thick black belt, standing behind some bushes. She kind of looked like she was from the 60s. She was just standing there and staring at us. We were going to ask her about how she got across the creek, because she was dressed nicely, and the crossing was about 10 to 20 feet, and there was no log or shallow part of the creek, and as we got closer, she just faded away. Then we just ran across the creek to the park. Me and my friends still remember this encounter. After this incident, I was interested in the paranormal and collected stories from my friends and family. I know this is kind of a short story, but I thought it was worth sharing. Thank you. I will try to make a short story, but wanted to share my story with your group. We purchased a home about 4.5 years ago. I met the lady and saw the husband only a short time when we had the inspection of the home. We were delayed on the closing because her husband passed away. Approximately 3 or 4 months after moving in, I kept seeing a man by our pool. Thinking it was the neighbor who lived behind us, I forgot about it. Our home sits on a couple of acres of land, and eventually, I started seeing this man near the woods and where they had a garden plot before. It appeared as though this man was hiding and smoking cigarettes of all things. I met and talked to one of the neighbors and told her of the strange behavior of the neighbor and asked if he ever did that on our property. I described the man to her and what he was doing, and her face went white. She told me I was describing the old owner of the house and that he died of lung cancer, but refused to stop smoking and did those things while living there so as his family wouldn't catch him. Eventually, he started appearing to me in the house, especially in the evening hours, sometimes slamming doors to unoccupied rooms or making hammering noises in the garage, which is under our house. It is just my husband and I who live in the house, and for almost 1.5 years, I was the only one to see him, but other people could hear the noises. Finally, my husband did see him, or what he thought to be the shadow of a man behind him, one day in our bedroom. As time went on, he became more and more active until I started to be afraid to be in the house by myself. He was beginning to be active, even during the daytime. I don't know if active is the right words to describe this, so I apologize if I am wrong. I finally was able to track down the previous owners and tell them what was going on. These people were wonderful and believed everything I was trying to tell them because of the things I was able to tell them about Dave that I couldn't have possibly known. They contacted us and agreed to come over to our house. They went through the whole house and talked to Dave as if he was there and telling him he had died. They told him we were the owners of the house now, and he no longer lived there, and he had to leave. Now, I'm surely not a ghost expert, but I do know that after that night, I've never seen or heard from him again. Did this man cross over as I heard shows talk about? Luckily, I have wonderful friends, and they believe me, even though if I hadn't been there, I might have not. Thank you for listening to my story. Even though you've probably heard stories like this quite often, your website is great. I enjoyed visiting. When I was younger, I often despised sleeping in our basement, especially alone. So oftentimes, I would stay in my sister's room whenever my brother, who I shared a room with, was on a scouting adventure or something of that nature. But one night, I was out of luck when it came to the blessing of having someone to sleep with, when they were all either gone at a friend's house or attending girls' camp or a fishing trip. And of course, being 10 years of age, my mother, although loving and magnificent, believed I was a little too old to sleep with her. So I came up with a plan. I would invite my best friend over. Ever since Kristen and I were 4 years old, she has always hated that there were bars over our basement windows. Well, finally, it was off to bed. We scurried about brushing our teeth and giggling before Mom came to tuck us in. My brother and I shared a bunk bed, and I always liked to sleep up top. I felt safer with the concoct idea that any monsters would have to eat whoever's on the bottom bunk before they could get to me. Therefore, I could easily get away. Hope you followed it. Anyways, back to the story. So we were laying there and talking, and slowly drifted off to sleep, when I was suddenly awakened by a strange noise outside of the barred window. I glanced over to see what appeared to be a woman in white, staring with no expression at all at Kristen and I from outside the window. My heart began to race. I'd never seen her before. She has dark brown hair that seemed to be ratted, and a long-stained, torn and tattered dress. She looked so pale, and like I said, she was merely staring with no expression. I was officially freaked out. I thought I should calm down. It's my imagination running wildly, because I'm not with anybody or anyone. So I closed my eyes, praying that when I opened them again, she would be gone. So then I opened them, and she was still there. This time, she reached out her hands to me as though she wanted to hold me. I screamed, and then noticed she wasn't looking at me anymore, merely placing her focus on Kristen. Then I saw Kristen get up. She started walking towards the window. I called her name and said, "What are you thinking?" Kristen ignored me and continued walking. She crawled up on top of her toy box and began to unlatch the window. I screamed for her to stop. She seemed as though she was in a trance or daze and couldn't even hear me. I struggled between staying in bed and not moving, or getting up and latching the window and saving Kristen. My heart was racing. I felt nauseated. Then, all of a sudden, everything returned to normal. Then, all of a sudden, she woke up. She was awake from her trance. It turns out that she was sleepwalking. Curiously enough, I looked outside the window again, and the woman that I once saw had completely vanished. I was completely confused and dumbfounded. So I went over to Kristen to see if she was alright. At this point, Kristen was in my arms. She was shaking uncontrollably, and she regained consciousness. I asked her what she was thinking, why she ignored me, and she said all she could recall was an angelic voice singing to her, begging her to come with her. I said, "What?" She said she had some sort of dream or vision, and this is what happened. At that point, that's when I told Kristen that she got up and walked towards the window. I also let her know that there was a woman right outside the barred window, and she couldn't even believe it. Maybe this was the angelic person that she was talking about, the woman. Maybe she telepathically communicated, and as a result, ended up infiltrating her dreams, and then Kristen started sleepwalking. I know you might think I'm crazy, but this story did actually happen. I can vouch for two people being there, me, and of course her side of the story. Immediately when it happened, we were both so frozen that we didn't know what to do after that. I looked at Christy, and she was so delirious, but also very shocked at everything that happened. I asked her if she wanted to go to sleep again, and she replied, "But I can barely even move." So I said, "We can sleep here right on the floor." The next day, when we were at breakfast, we both just knew that this isn't a story many would believe, so we mostly just kept to ourselves. Until, of course, I actually wrote this story here today. Thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate you letting me tell this tale. And believe me, this is not something anyone would want to experience, but I guess we have a good story now. So impressed and comforted by your sight, I had an experience at the Sourdough Inn in Seward, Alaska 2 years ago that I've never shared with people anymore because they don't believe me, and felt inspired to write after reading on your site. The hotel was a brothel at the turn of the century, and the innkeeper will happily tell you that the upper rooms are haunted by the spirits of the girls who lived there. The most prevalent is the lady in white, who was the madam. I may be remembering the name wrong, but there are a few rooms downstairs in the basement as well, and that is where I had my encounter. My friend, Ollie, and I decided to stay there because of the legends, and had spent 2 nights upstairs without a peep. Our last night was in the basement. I had a little head cold and sniffles, and the innkeeper advised us to keep the windows closed due to a nasty draft. After securing the windows shut, we went to bed. About 2 hours into a fitful sleep, I was awakened by the window creaking open. I thought it was odd, since we had latched it. A window being to my left, I was staring at it when I realized there was a woman in white standing next to my bed. This is typically where people stop believing me. She noticed me notice her and reached out to feel my forehead. She was also holding what looked like a towel in her right hand and was smiling in the most comforting way. I couldn't help it though. I reached out and shook Ollie awake, looked back, and she was still there. Ollie fumbled to focus, and then I screamed like I've never screamed before in my life. I think she was just checking and making sure I was okay. And here's the interesting thing too. When we finally woke up and got our bearings, we realized the room was way too hot and even smelled a little funny. We had left our propane lantern on. I think that's why she opened the window. I feel better. It is a beautiful, magical place to stay. If I ever return, I've every intention. There was no malice in her visit. I only hope I cannot scream at her if I ever see her again. I just wanted to write and say that I had a scary experience at Banks, Ohio, House of Nightmares haunted house. Well, I was on the volunteer fire department for Centerburg, and we went there to work and to inspect the house. Well, one night, they had me working the spider, which I had to go up on the staircase by myself. The house once was an orphanage, mental hospital, and a Bible college. While I was working the spider, I had to look down to watch when the people were coming. Well, once, I just felt like someone was watching me, so I looked up and saw this little girl. She was see-through and was wearing a white tattered nightgown, had blonde hair, and was dragging a brown teddy bear. She was looking towards the ground, so I just started to freak out. So I shut my eyes and opened them again, and she was gone. Another experience I had at this house of nightmares. I was working the spider, and up on the staircase there was no door or anything, and I heard this man's voice ask if I was okay. Yes, up on the staircase, at the top, where there is no door, just completely alone and isolated from the rest of the people. and since there is no door, there is no way anyone could have gotten up there. Another time, when I was working on the spider, again, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It almost looked like a floating head coming straight towards me. Because I was looking at it in the corner of my eye, I couldn't get a clear look of what it looked like. But it could have been an orb as well. I'm not sure though, but I had a feeling that it was a head. Anyway, thanks for allowing me to share my story. I know it sounds kinda weird, but all of these events are true. I have felt, until rather recently, an unsettling presence in my apartment since my ex-husband moved out last November. It was almost as if the dwelling itself warned me away from crossing into particular rooms or areas of the apartment. There had been times when I could not sleep in my own bedroom because it was located near the rear of the apartment. I was afraid to go past the middle hallway. One night, I came up to get a jacket while my boyfriend was waiting outside for me, in the car. I got as far as 1 foot in the doorway and felt the overwhelming presence, in some sense telling me to turn around and get out now. I forgot about the jacket and ran back downstairs and outside. I hadn't had one of those experiences in some time until my best friend came over to do an in-depth tarot card reading. She relies upon the power of her spirits and her Lord Phoenix. She's a Phoenix witch, which she explains to me as someone who has crossed over, was offered a second chance at life, or with the cost of helping less fortunate souls find their way back to heaven. My boyfriend was there at the time as well. When she was about finished with her reading, I happened to glance over by my computer in the dining room and saw a small, round, blurry ball floating past the computer and disappearing before it reached my living room where we were doing the reading. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I had to use the bathroom, which was located near the bedroom. As I went to get up and glance in that direction of the apartment, I had the overwhelming feeling to stay back away from there again. I asked her what was over there, and she went into the middle hallway with the candle. She came back with an angry expression, saying that the thing called her an abomination. She felt it referred to her being brought back and given a second chance at life. She felt the presence was jealous and hurt. She called me over to join her in the exorcism of the spirit. When she asked it repeatedly to leave, we both heard it in a strong, emphatic male voice say, "No." I was so scared. What scared me even more was that my boyfriend declared out of the blue, "Someone died in your bathroom." What? Yes, someone died in your shower. I knew about it since the first time I showered here. I decided it was not wise to sleep alone in my place that night, so as I went into my bedroom with both friends to pack, we noticed that things in my room had been disturbed and moved around. When we moved into my bathroom to get my toiletries, my boyfriend proceeded to tell me how the person died, slipped and fell in the shower, broken neck. I couldn't take it anymore and left that night. That was the last time I had my best friend to do any readings here without her spirit protection. This event is true and happened when I was 9 years old. It was the night of November 12th, my birthday. Me and my friends were walking back from the bowling alley to my house for a sleepover. The bowling alley was only 10 minutes away. Anyway, on the way back, my friend Matt dared me to go to the middle of the woods without my flashlight. I went in and came out 10 minutes later. All my friends had terrified looks on their faces. "What?" I asked. Matt pointed behind me. When I turned around, a 5-foot-tall woman in a white dress with black hair was standing there. She looked really mad. We ran as fast as we could. We finally got to the house and jumped in our sleeping bags. No one moved, and we eventually all fell asleep. I awoke at 3 a.m. in the morning to go get a glass of water. I had totally forgot about the incident until I stopped and heard very, very heavy breathing behind me. I thought it was my dog, but when I turned around, it was her. She had the same look on her face. I screamed as loud as I could, and my friends came running down the hall, asking me what happened. I told them, and we all went back in the room and stayed up until the next day. I told my mom what happened, but she didn't believe me. That is, until she found my pet snake dead, and she started seeing the strands of long black hair all over the house. We moved out shortly after that, and I will never go back to the house again, let alone look at it. I still find black hair in my bed sometimes, even though we're at our new house, and there's no one in my family with black hair. I think she is following me, maybe trying to tell me something. On rare occasions I'll be playing my drum set, when all of a sudden I stop and hear mumbling and groaning. If I ever have an encounter with this ghost again, I'll send it ASAP. Thank you.
Please subscribe to the channel. Please like and comment. Enjoy the compilation because that's what you're receiving. I like compilations, so please like them too. Give this video a like, comment, and be the best. Okay guys, thank you for listening, and please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Ignore my silly wackiness at the end of this video.